Thank you. Welcome back to day 3 of hearing 14. It's certainly nice to have a bit of a break to get on with a few other things. I think everyone's realised we had a very busy couple of days on Monday and Tuesday, and got through a lot of good discussion. Just pause while a few others join. There's a speech here. Right, I think we should start with our prayer, our karakia. Antoine, if you could open the proceedings, that would be great, thank you.
Hey, kia ora mai tātou. I can't quite see who's in the room at the moment, but I just wanted to firstly off if there is someone in the audience nā ngā tangata whenua I tīmata I tātou hui, I tukuna te rākio kia koutou. I just wanted to just acknowledge those who are in the room. I can't actually see who's in the room, but if there was someone appropriate to start,
we do have a volunteer, so by the look of things.
Thank you.
Anaru White. Thank you.
Kia ora Anaru. Kia ora koe tarangatira.
Ana, kia ora tātai pati tuā kia tātai. Mihi roa, mihi aroha, mihi mahara kia koutou katoa. Tēnei te mauri ka piki api ki te rangi tūnei, I rangi atua, rangi tupua, rangi tāpito. Kia ita, ko te mātau ranga, kia tau, ko te māratanga. Whaia puritia, kia mau tūturu, witi waka mawa, kia tīna, hui e, tēnā tātou.
Thank you very much, Anaru. I've been sort of prompting some volunteers for the first couple of days, and a lot of the iwi smithers have been on the Zoom, and no one put their hand up. So certainly Antoine's filled in very graciously. So thank you, everyone. I think just for today, we do have quite a few people in the room here, many familiar faces, a few new faces for me. I'll just do a quick introduction to our hearing processes and protocols. Just introducing myself, Stephen Daish. I hail from Ahuriri, Napier, having grown up around the country, being a son of a sort of country school teachers. So living around the country. I'm a planner and hearing commissioner chair, and have done quite a bit in Taranaki over the last few years in terms of helping the council with chairing resource management matters. So that's me. We'll get Antoine and David to introduce themselves.
Kia ora mai tātou, ko Mawal te maunga, ko tauranga te moana, ko Ngāti Rangi Nui, ngai tarangi me raukau aku iwi, e mihi kawana kia koutou, ko tai mai nei tēnei rā, o tira e mihi kawana kia koe tarangatira Anaru I tīmata I tātou hui I ngā kupu karakia. Antoine Coffin from Tauranga, Cultural Heritage Specialist, Hearing Commissioner and Freshwater Commissioner. Good to be back with you again.
Thank you, David.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. David McMahon, Resource Management Practitioner and Independent Hearing Commissioner, these days based in Wellington, previously Christchurch, where I moved up following the 2011 earthquakes and have been there ever since. My speciality is probably planning process, and I apply that to a number of realms, district and regional plans, policy statements, designations, resource consents, really from a 360-degree perspective as applicant, as processor, and as decision maker. So I like to think I bring a very sort of circular and round approach to decision making, having those other strands under my belt. Day 3, really looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, David. And just to confirm to everyone, we have been appointed as independent hearing commissioners to consider and make recommendations on every aspect of the district plan. It's quite a big job. We're at hearing 14 out of 24, I think we're up to now, and started hearings in June. And we'll finish our process at the end of June when we've worked through our recommendations and deliver those to the council. We do have a conflict of interest schedule posted on the website. So far, it's just how we manage other work we might have done around Taranaki, and I've made sure that if one of the commissioners, say, worked on a court hearing, for example, in the past, they're not hearing this in terms of the policy matters. So we just make sure that no one's got any concerns with us as we've declared our interests at each hearing. It's just a process matter. I'll normally give people 2 seconds to pipe up. If they don't, we carry on. All right. In terms of the Zoom protocol, I think most of you have heard this before. You'll see Antoine and David online. I'm here to chair, really it's much easier for me to chair in the room and look up at the screen rather than sort of peer into the room and there's people here. So it's really important that I'm here at least. There has been some feedback, Julie, that when the submitters are talking, can we zoom the camera on them? Because I think that will help certainly Antoine and David. We've got the room view now, which is important. If we can just do that and sing out, guys, if you're not seeing clearly enough, and we can just adjust the technology. This room's got amazing technology, really. I know a lot of it's not in use, but seriously.
That'll be great, Stephen. Really appreciate that.
Yes, seriously good microphone, so picks things up really well. The other thing to note is if you are presenting and there's more than one of you, just present as a team, come forward to the table together, got support people. We're trying to make this as comfortable as possible. And same on the Zoom schedule, if there's one or two or three, just turn your cameras on and we can manage with that. I think we've missed the health and safety matters, which we'll perhaps do now. Julie?
Kia ora koutou. So in the event of an emergency, if the fire alarm goes, we exit through the main door that you came in and head down the footpath towards Puketira Park. If it's an earthquake, drop, cover, hold as best you can, and we will await further instruction. In terms of mask protocols, so at all times you're in a public space, we need you to keep your masks on unless you have a valid exemption. However, when you are presenting, you can remove your mask. There is a cafeteria upstairs which closes about 3:30ish, and you would require a vaccine pass to access the cafeteria. Toilets to your left around the corner.
Thank you. Any questions about any of that? I think we're all getting pretty familiar. It's quite a feel it's a bit of a family. We're the same people, many people the same. We're sort of working through this journey together, and it's lovely to see the same faces. But I think just for respect and just so we know who's who, I will do a very quick hello around the room and around the Zoom because yes, okay, starting with you, Julie.
So Julie Straka, sender of numerous emails and hearing administrator.
Kia ora tātou, Joe Ritchie, Settlement Report.
Kia ora, Ngāi Benson, I'm presenting from Ngāti Wituna. Kia ora, Huri Moana Āre, Ngāti Wituna.
Kia ora, no, Anaru White, Pukirangi ora hapu.
Kia ora tātou, Keith Holsworth, Tātia Harry Hapu.
Thank you, Keith.
Me ana kia tātou, ko tāne manu ko matuku ingoa, I'll be submitting today for Ngā Mahanga Tai.
So Joe White, submitting for 140 update.
Kia ora, Chief White Manukuri.
Well, but our Sharon's Day, Matatani. Support.
Kia ora, Sarah Edwards, District Candidate for the District Council.
Kia ora, Ngā Mahanga Tai.
Well, Keith Michael, Ngā Mahanga Tai.
Arohana Imbes on the.
Tātou Sarah Mako te kotai tango o tia te ola.
I am a Māori policy advisor in the area relations team.
Yes, and bear with me while we go around the Zoom screen. We have Michael first up.
I believe that's Michael Keat.
Michael
Doesn't
Keat.
look like he's got a microphone actually.
Oh, okay.
We'll be here later.
Yes, thanks for joining us, Michael. Glenn.
Kia ora koutou, Glenn Skipper, for Ngāti Tāwhirikura Hapu.
Thank you, Glenn. Welcome. Yes, next.
Kia ora koutou, ko Share Se, tōku ingoa, ko Gwibet Glenn, tōku tāku mahi. I'm just stepping in for Lauren Wallace while she's presenting on another matter. We are counsel for the council, and I'll just be here observing until Lauren is able to attend. Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Sam T at PRC. Maybe not there. We'll move on. Oh,
Kia ora, yeah, Sam T here.
yes. Daniel McCurdy just
Yes, kia ora koutou. My name's Daniel McCurdy. I'm an archaeologist in private practice, contracted by New Plymouth District Council for the Wahitapu Review Project.
Thank you, Daniel. Adelaide, PRC.
Kia ora, Adelaide Campbell, Planning Officer at the Taranaki Regional Council, just listening in.
Yeah, welcome, Adelaide. Very welcome. Laura Jeffries.
Kia ora everyone, I'm here on behalf of Hilary Walker, who has been involved for Federated Farmers, so just observing for her today. I've also got Mike Campbell on the line as well, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. There's Mike. Hello.
Yeah, kia ora all. What Laura said, just here to observe.
Yes, fantastic that you're listening in to the kōrero. Richard B, I think, is next for me.
Kia ora koutou, ko Richard Baramo'o. I'll be submitting for Paranihi ki Waitotara, and I'll be coming in hopefully in person shortly.
Great, we'll see you soon. Yes. Is Bishop? No. We have to. Casey, perhaps you could just check in.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Casey Bellamy, Te Kotaitanga o Te Atiawa Trust.
Welcome, Casey. Always that big smile. Mulligan, I'm not sure this is her name.
Kia ora koutou, ko whai Mulligan ahau no Ngā Mahanga.
Thank you very much, kia ora. Patsy, see you there.
Kia ora, Patsy Bodger Manukuri Hapu.
Yep. Hi, Patsy.
Kia ora, Stephen and fellows commissioners.
Yes, Maria.
Kia koutou, ko Mari Hokopaurao for Tahui o Taranaki. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Maria. Ian Rowe, still there. Ian's the one who's in Japan, is it right?
No, that's bad.
Bad. No, it's bad. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to Jackie King.
Kia ora koutou. Aroha mai. Ko Jackie King, Taku Ingoa. I'm presenting with Richard Buttermore for Parananihiki Waitotara, but also got a particular interest in our rohi of Taranaki, particularly from Ngā Mahanga Tairi. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Jackie. And Grant Nucky, you're there too? Turn your speaker on there, Grant. It might have been a hello. Here we go. We can't quite hear you, Grant. So
I think you might have scared him off, Stephen.
yeah. Okay. Welcome, Grant. All right. I think that's the team for today. Thank you very much for coming and attending. First off, Manu Korohi Hapu, Joe White and Jeff White are presenting, but it is a wider group. Certainly come up.
E mihi ana ki ngā kumihana, e hui mai nei, tēnei rā, Stephen, kia ora anō.
Kia ora.
Ngā kaumai o te kanuhene o Ngā Motu, Julie, Joe, Aroha, tēnā koutou. Te whānau i hui, tēnei rā, marongo i te pāoka, Whakaata, tēnā koutou. Ko taranaki te maunga, waitara te awa te awa te iwi, ko wai te marae, ko manukuri i te hapu, ko Jeffrey te manu aru pe wai, maua ko Joanne Mealing White, ngā uri o manukuri i hapu, e kōrero ana nei. My name is Jeffrey te manu aru pe wai, and I'm a descendant of Manukuri Hapu. I am the chairperson of the Manukuri Hapu Charitable Trust and a trustee of Te Kōwhatu Tuiwai Trust.
My name is Joanne Media White and I'm a descendant of Manukuri Hapu. I'm the administrator of the Manukuri Hapu Charitable Trust. I've been an active member of Manukurihi for over 20 years. I'm the kaitiaki of the Mautauranga in relation to Manukurihi Waitutapu and the mandated representative. For Manukurihi Hapu in relation to resource management matters, specifically informing cultural impact assessments to inform developments on and or in proximity to sites and areas of significance to Manukurihi.
We have both lived in Waitara our entire lives, raised at Manukuri Hapu, Manukuri Pā, or Marae. We are providing this evidence on behalf of Manukuri Hapu. We present this evidence in support of the evidence by Te Teitanga o Te Aotearoa Trust. The purpose of this evidence is to address sites and areas of significance to Māori. The rohi of Manukuri extends from Ongatiki in the west, eastwards along the coast of Titirangi, up the Waipapa stream to where a line crosses the Waitara River through Manaiti on the east side and to the seaward side of Mamaku on the west side. Then it turns seaward toward Ongatiki behind Puki Taukaere and Onuku Kaitara. Our rohi encompasses the Waitara township. The entire rohi of Manukuri is of significance to our hapu, an area historically occupied by our tupuna, where they walked. We currently walk, SPCA, excuse me, and where our mokupuna will walk the footsteps of their tupuna, te kaumātua and the tuakana. It is an area that has sustained our people spiritually, mentally and physically for many generations, stretching back long before the arrival of the Pākehā and long before the canoes of the Great Fleet. Within our rohe, our sites and areas where historically specific tikanga kaupapa activities, processes and events occur and some which continue to occur today, including Urupa, Pā, Marae, Kainga, Awa, Tauranga Waka, Mahinga Kai, and Taonga Raranga and Rongo. Although many of these sites have been destroyed due to past and present urban growth and development, the sites and areas are important to us because they are our connection, our identity, our whakapapa to the natural and physical environment. This is our place to stand, and it is our responsibility as mana whenua, kaitiaki, to protect and nurture what remains within our rohe for past, present and future generations. Our connection, our identity, our whakapapa to people of the environment is reiterated in the evidence of our whanaunga Patsy Bodger for Manukuri presented at hearing 5, specifically in relation to water bodies and also relevant to the entire rohe of Manukuri. Water is of the utmost importance irrespective of where it is located in the district or its current state of degradation. Water bodies are not stormwater infrastructure. All water is interconnected through whakapapa. Water has its own mana, its own mauri, and its own intelligent being with memory, spirit, and feelings. And our relationship with water must be recognised and provided for. The ancient Manukuri Pā, for example, consists of wharekuri, wharekura marae, tere mutu marae, oai marae, te whaitara nui a ngārui, whare tupuna, te ikaro a Maui, whare nui, tamatane, whare manaki, tamawahine, whare kai, tere mutu, urupa, and tangaro, the awa. The spring-fed tangaro awa runs through the Pā and physically connects to the Waitara River, with large terrace gardens overlooking the Canoe Harbour, Tauranga Waka. The river has always been a rich source of mahinga kai and an important part of travel and other customary activities. These sites and areas, in our opinion, viewed as a whole. As said in our evidence to hearing 9, the rate of activity and development in our rohe has increased a lot over the past few years. It has caused the disturbance and physical destruction of some of our important sites and areas, reflected in the mapped extent of Manukuri Pā. Our knowledge of the extent of the Pā is that it is much more expansive than it is included in the proposed district plan.
I, Joanne White, have been involved with the Waihitapu and archaeological sites reviews project since 2007. Our expectations are that this plan will protect our sites and areas of significance, the whakapapa of our whakapuna. We support the identification, mapping and scheduling of our sites and areas of significance to Manukuri in principle. However, wish to reiterate the importance of our entire rohe and request its protection from inappropriate activity and development. Our active relationship with our rohe now and into the future includes a relationship with our sites and areas and forms part of the character of Waitara. Manukuri Hapu support the ongoing Waitonga and archaeological sites review project. We consider the archaeological record is never complete. The scheduling of archaeological sites and or SASM is also supported. However, Manukuri Hapu acknowledges we have not had the opportunity to review the Schedule 3 in detail and wish to spend more time with New Plymouth District Council Kaimahi to correct errors within the schedule in response to SASM and archaeological sites within Manukuri Rohe. To address the issues that we have raised, this evidence recommends that the rohe of Manukuri Hapu is recognised and provided for as a landscape of significance in the proposed district plan. Sites and areas of significance to Manukuri are afforded the utmost protection. Support for Schedule 3 of the proposed district plan. Manukuri seek to work with NPDC Kaimahi to correct errors within the schedule. Well done.
Kia ora, Jeff and Joe. Thank you very much. We have a batting order for questions, and we kick off with Antoine.
Tēnā kōruatahi, he mihi kawana kia koutou kua puta mai ngā kōrero I tēnei wā. Thank you very much for your submission. I have 3 questions for you. Can you hear me clearly? That's not one of my questions, but that's great. This is a question I'm asking each of the iwi and hapu, the first 2 questions. The first one is, could you talk us through the process in which you've been involved in to identify the sites and areas of significance to Māori that are important to Manukōrehi hapu?
Well, in 2007, the Waitapu Reference Group created a memorandum of understanding of how we were going to work. We listed what the purpose was, what we hoped to achieve, those sorts of things. It took a long time for the sites to be verified. 2019, we got the first draft. 83 sites for Manukōrehi were listed. I worked with Sean Zilcher, was the first archaeologist I worked with. We did probably a couple of site visits. The second draft came through. We wanted to include more sites, 92 to be precise. 39 of those sites had to be discussed with other hapu that claim mana whenua. I could never get to the table with those. I did try. The GPS mapping system that the council had included in this process didn't work for several years. A lot of errors. i.e. one of our sites was in the national park. Then it took a long time for those things. I don't even think that geo mapping is still correct. 2021, I did meet with Joe Rich a couple of times and the archaeologist discussing the changes we would like made. 2021 final draft was, well, it's the proposed plan really, 80 sites and 47 are shared with other hapu claiming mana whenua. We've lost our Titirangi. We've been removed from Titirangi, which is our marker pā. Ona Tiki, our other boundary in the west, has been marked by other hapu twice. So it's not marked there now. So these are the things I would like more time to work through.
Hey, thank you. That was a really fulsome summary of your involvement. Thank you. My second question is probably more specific in terms of where there's been uncertainty or you've been going through the process of working out what's the extent of a site. So there's the location of a site and the kōrero that goes with it. But when you're looking at the GIS and trying to work out how big is it, where is its boundaries, where are those values apply? How have you gone about that? What sort of things have you relied on?
A lot of our oral history, for example, Manukōrehi pā. So the site extent is a lot greater than what is mapped currently. As part of the pā, we have Owai Marae mapped as a site, Tere Mutu, which was the marae / urupā. Wharikura is the top marae where the intermediate is, that's not mapped. We haven't been able to get that on there, very, very significant place. Then you have the Tauranga Waka down the bottom of the pā, marked at a different site. We got Pareroa at the top of the cliff.
Joe, we'll bring up the planning map for this area, just so you can take us through. And we'll do it in a way that the people on the Zoom can see it too. I mean Julie will.
Optimistic.
Yeah, this is a big one. The school is Julie.
Sorry?
White intermediate school.
While Julie's bringing that up, these may seem like perhaps dumb questions, and perhaps they are at one level. I've had some experience in identifying site significance and their extents, and I've often found that the extent is one of the hardest things to do. You know, where do you put a line in the sand? Is it too small? Is it too big? And we've also had a number of submitters, particularly landowners, who were questioning how the extents would come to. And I've made an assumption that, you know, local hapu would rely on people like yourself who have the knowledge of these places. You would have your own wānanga hui to discuss those. You do site visits. There would be some kōrero about, you know, those things you want to divulge and those things you don't want to divulge. So I suppose my question is just along those lines. So this is an opportunity for us to confirm that you've been through a process for those extents, especially where we have submitters who are wanting some changes to the extent of some of these places, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I believe that we're only allowed to map a specific area. We can't go too large. That's why Manukorihi Pa looks like that, with different sites. And I think my experience with Joe and Dan, they rely heavily on archaeological evidence to map a site. They pretty much tell you where you can mark the site.
Joe, the school you mentioned, that's on the right-hand side of the screen. Is that the intermediate school you talked about?
Yes.
Down the bottom. Down the bottom of the
Is it down the bottom of the screen?
Yes.
Oh.
So that is Wharekura Marae.
Yes.
That was the place of Manukorihi School of Learning. There was a waka carving school, a weaving school. The old Chief Makere lived there. So it's really important. This ko'iwi found when they were building that intermediate. There's also a waka under one of the buildings that they left there. So I wanted that. I mean, when you go there, there's nothing to recognise the Pa site at all. And it's the most significant place.
There was a wānanga as well. Yes. So is that mapped or not? Like, is that shading, Joe? Is that a?
There is quite a large area that is shaded there for the different sites. It's hard to see sometimes in these, but there are actually several sites listed there. But that's correct, the site is limited on some level to the archaeology that's been identified. But obviously that's another discussion to have, if we can map it according to the SASM values.
Okay.
So to the south, there's another pa, Kaipeke, the Awa. We believe the whole area there is the pa. Then we've got our Tauranga Waka, which is at the bottom of Pennington Park.
Is it Mangahino, is it? Is that the site?
No, it's Tangaroa.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, there it is. Yep. 2623. Thank you.
So the stream, our Tangaroa stream runs through the pa. The source is just up by Drever Development, Drever Drive Big Development. And then the stream drops down to Pennington Park, that was the Tauranga Waka, which really is part of the PAR in our view.
Is the Tauranga Waka area
That's the
identified?
Canoe Harbour.
Yes, yes.
You've got up to 100 waka could get in there.
Is that identified as a season?
It's identified as a Tauranga.
Okay, okay, yeah, great. Yes.
That's a really good example. Thank you very much for that.
Mm.
My last question was in the evidence you provided to us, the very last recommendation, sorry, the last recommendation 14C, says Manu Kōrehi seek to work with New Plymouth District Council Kaimahi to correct areas within the schedule, and we appreciate that nothing is perfect. Everything reflects a point in time. One of the things that we will do as commissioners is make these recommendations on what should be in the district plan for the next 10 years, and sometimes there might be some errors in that because it's a particular point in time, and that there may not be an opportunity to change those if they're more than minor changes till the next plan change, or even might be even 10 years from now. So I suppose what I'm indicating is are there any significant areas that we should be aware of that we should be considering now, rather than, and I'm not talking about maybe a little text change or it might be a spelling or something. I think we could consider those minor inaccuracies. But anything significant that you just want to bring to our attention that we should be aware of?
Okay. Well, for us, particularly the PAR marking our rui, titirangi were being removed. That's a significant thing for us. We were on the original, I believe that's an error. We were taken off and Ngāti Wutanga were put on instead of us. Again, all Ngā Tiki mapped by other hapu, that is our boundary. So we need an opportunity to mark.
I think what Joe's saying is we need to have the opportunity to sit down and with council and get, from our opinion, get it correct, because sites of significance and wāhi tapu have become, the way we see it, have become, if in doubt or if questionable, if you're talking with council, local bodies, whatever, in order to disperse any friction, then they invite everybody. So what happens is, if you believe you have mana whenua, then your mana over that territory is diluted because of that. And it happens quite often. So all we're asking from our point of view is to say, we believe this is correct. We want the opportunity to map it accordingly, and then that's all we're asking for. I think, you know, as a classic example, right at the moment as we speak, Oe Marae, Manukurihi Pā. So when they opened the Wharenui in 1934, they produced a booklet, and the booklet was, which we all still have copies of, and it explained the history of the area, and it was, a lot of it was written by Maui Pomare and Peter Buck and those in the legends of the time, and basically stating that the parcel of Manukurihi was 21 acres in its smallest extent, not its larger extent, its smallest extent. So currently we have Waka Kotahi building interceptor pipe up State Highway 3. They're going up to around about up in, at the top of Princey Street. They're going to take that surplus water, bring it down, hook it around, and then run along what is known as Manukurihi Park, which is a cricket club / soccer club, and that surface water is going into the Awa. So we believe that where that water goes into the Awa, that's part of the mine. But it's not noted as such. Currently, we have 4, maybe more, hapu that sit on the Kaitiaki Forum. So, you know, we all have all of hapu within this area have the ability to go to Manukurihi Park. That's what it was set up for. You know, when they built it, they brought in all the carvers and the weavers from Aotearoa, Ngā Hauiwha, everywhere. So it became a house, that's what's called Te Ikaroa Māori, because it's the house of everybody, right? So we don't say, no, you can't come. All we want to say is, this is the area of the park, and we want it noted accordingly. That's all we want. So to say that certain portions have been mapped accordingly, according to a map that sits within council, all we're asking for is that map is correct.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. White. That was a good illustration of your concerns. What I took from that, Mr. Chair, was there was 2 issues there. One is appears to be some discrepancies or differences of opinion on the extent of Manukurihi Paha, and then the other is around the notations for the mana whenua for sites, which I'm certainly not in a position to be able to determine, you know, who should or shouldn't be on those sites, but it certainly seems like that it'd be prudent for some discussions to have in that regard, to see if that matter could be resolved before our sort of window of opportunity closes and we start setting the plan in stone, so to say, for the next wee while. So that was all my questions, and thank you very much for those responses.
Thank you, Antoine. There is some body language happening in the room, which you probably can't see.
Sorry, I can't see it.
Yeah.
I might have moderated my questions or
No, look, I think your questions are just spot on, and just the answers. You know, it's those 2 matters you've summarised, and from what I can gather are right, and I think they will perhaps cover a number of the other sites as well. So we'll move to David now for any questions he has. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Jeff and Joe and Antoine for that presentation and your summary at the end. Antoine, that was very useful. Look, I've been making a lot of notes, Jeff and Joe, and I really just want to listen during this afternoon to your concerns. I don't want to be asking questions that you find offensive, but I do want to just ask a question of clarification regarding the process that you outlined, Joe, between 2007, when the reference group and the review process kicked off, and right through to the notification of the plan. I found that extremely useful. And you indicated that at the time of each draft, there were a number of sites that you would have liked to have seen added. I didn't get the first number on the first draft, but I picked up that there were 92 on the second draft, and I think you said 80 on the final draft. Was that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So my question there is, these are actual sites that are missing off Schedule 3 in your view?
Yes.
Yes. And the submission by your hapu, did it request that those sites be added onto the Schedule 3?
Yes. Oh, not in the submission, but I was working with Joe Ritchie. We got the final draft a week before the submissions, the hearing started. We only got these, so we haven't been able to check just before Christmas.
Yes, but when the plan was notified in 2019, and it had Schedule 3 and it had a list of sites, was that where the 80 sites were missing in your view at that
And
point?
we've got 83 sites.
83,
there.
yes. And when you, sorry, carry on.
And then the next draft, we wanted to add sites that were within our rohe,
Yes.
but we had to, there were 39 that had to be discussed. So pretty much we had to get permission from other hapu claiming mana whenua.
Okay.
Our name on those sites.
Yes. Okay. No, I certainly understand that point, and that was the second theme that Antoine discussed about the notation of hapu, and I'm certainly not going to ask a question about that. I understand the sensitivity of it. But what I'm confused about is when you talk about the next draft, when the plan was notified, that was the final plan. And what I'm hearing from you is that there were a number of sites that weren't on it based on your rohe. And my question was, did your submission that you lodged back in 2019 or 2020, whenever it was, did it include a request for those sites to be included on the schedule?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I know we had a meeting with Sean Filcher and he opened the window to give us that opportunity to be able to discuss this further.
I think, David, there's so much paper.
I know.
We don't have the actual submissions in front of us. But Joe, could you just check?
Yes.
Let us know what the what the submission was. We'll go back anyway and have a double check when we run our decisions. But if there was something you can find for us and just update through the day. Good.
Thank you, Stephen. That's exactly what I was sort of getting at. If Ms. Ritchie, there's no urgency to do that, certainly not today, but in the right of reply, that would be useful.
I did voice my concerns to Sean at the time when we were putting our Atiawa submission in. And so he was well aware of that. So he gave us, I think it is on that submission that Sean put in.
Super. Thank you for that. Thanks for that clarification, and thanks for that suggestion, Stephen. That's a very good one. That was everything from me.
I think there was what Joe was talking to us before the plan was notified, and then in resolving submissions.
Yes.
That difference between
when Joe issued her section 42A.
Just before, so Hapu did have the opportunity before section 42 was released, but there just wasn't time.
Okay. So I think we're talking about the time. I think when Joe talked about before Christmas, that's when Joe would have released her 42A report.
Yes.
Recommendations, and I think there's some dialogue that might have been useful then, but hasn't been able to be had. That's what I'm thinking about.
And I'm just wondering whether, because I know there are lots of other people to give evidence today, that we could perhaps discuss that as a general theme.
Yes.
After everyone has given evidence.
Yes. Yes.
Because they're all affected similarly.
No, I understand that. Yes.
And I just had a quick check. Manukuri, he did have scope to add submissions that were, add SASM that were omitted.
Yes.
At the notification stage.
Yes. All right. Oh, that's helpful. So that's sort of a detail we can check on. Jeff and Joe, I have one question. When Aroha and Joe introduced the chapter to us on Monday, they gave us a very useful presentation about where the process was up to in the timeline. With some of the hapu, for example, Ngāti Rahiri, which had had its own plan change looked at, it was a further along the pathway. It was recognised by the council that at a point of time we've got some certain sites in the district plan and the proposed district plan over and above, particularly extents much greater than they were in the plan, but there was more work to do. And they said to us that this is a long process, and Joe, I acknowledge what you said about archaeology is found all the time, so it's an ongoing process, and will probably never stop. But we were told that the council has got a forward program after this plan process is finished to continue with dialogue with Hapu, to continue completing the journey, and to bring forward plan changes on a maybe Hapu by Hapu basis or a wider area, even before the 10-year review, which means that the work that has to go into identifying, verifying, discussing, and then going to a plan change seems to be right. You know, the team is just going to continue working on this. So my question is that your understanding? Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
You know, anyone can make spurious accusations or justifications as to that's ours. Anyone can do it, but you have to be able to justify it. And so if you've got three different stories or whatever of a certain area, and they're all to be found to be true according to the people making those assertions, then so be it. Everyone will gladly accept that. But what the issue is if, say, for example, oh yeah, no, don't touch that, that's ours, prove it. So that's the issue. The issue is how do people actually get to a point where they say it's ours because of, shouldn't have to, because in Māoridom it's accepted, right? Ka pai. But you know, you got to wonder sometimes when people are saying, well, that's this and this and this, and you go, well, no, we don't agree with it. So therefore, what is the process you go through?
I found a lot of the evidence you provided, it didn't appear to be consistent. Anyone, like you said, oh, but my grandmother said, and then they've met it.
So we haven't provided any evidence. We're listening and hearing the evidence. So none of the evidence.
Yeah,
we're sort of going through what's put before us, and it's the council team. And so in terms of the players in this game, it's basically the council have spent a lot of time preparing a new plan. Lots of dialogue. Submitters have made submissions, with more dialogue and more clarification. And I think we are really, in many of the areas of the plan, we're actually homing in on something that a lot of the submitters, not necessarily this chapter, but across the board, there's quite a lot of, it's not even compromise, it's good planning that we all can all agree what the solution would be. On this chapter, we've been told by the council that they've got so far a lot more work to do. It's going to be an ongoing kaupapa, ongoing work over the next, I sort of get it 5 or 10 years, probably maybe. Is that right, Araha? Yes. That seems to me, that's why I asked you, do you think that's a good plan? Because at this point of time, we've got so much we can verify and go on, but there's some further dialogue to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's a time thing. Unfortunately, with Waitara and its history, and with regard to our people specifically being land being confiscated and then forcibly removed, and they went all over the country, you know, ended up down in Nelson, Westport, and down in Waikanae and all over the place because they were dispersed, because they had no land, so it was taken away from them. And then great thing about the Crown was they kept really good records, good records. And so when the land was redistributed to those people that were still here, and hate to bring this word up, but loyalists stood up and said, yeah, that's ours. And it was written down as theirs. And you go, well, how can that be right? when the people of the land were somewhere else, and that land was bequeathed to people that were there, who basically gave their patriotism to the crown. And you go, well, so I support the long, I know it's going to be arduous, the long journey to get this thing right.
Yes.
That's all we ask for. Because Manukuri is only small, but it sits in this hotbed of history. And all we want is the thing to be done properly. It's quite simple. But I understand the exercise. It's just, you know, and someone of independence has to make those calls. Has to. So we can't do it amongst ourselves. We've asked. But it's just, I wouldn't want to take that on.
Okay, thank you very much. And look, I've heard a lot about OY and Kurahi Pa, and one day I'd love to come and see it. So
just ring up.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Like Anaru Pukirangiora Hapu. Yes.
Kia tātou tūtaira nei rati kia tātou, o te rā, kei rā kai komihana nei rati kia koutou, o te rā, o ko te ranga, tuakana, tuahine, nei rati kia koutou. Ko ai au, karaki maunga, ko manganui te awa, ko kairau te marae, ko Anaru Waitoku Ingoa, ko au titahi mamai, o te hapu o Pukerangiora. Kia ora everybody, my name is Anaru White. I'm here representing Pukerangiora Hapu. Probably just a little bit of background about myself. I've been involved with the management committee for a few years now. As part of that role and support, I've had the ability to interact with a lot of whānau, hapu, iwi, and through those interactions, have learned a lot about history of Waitara, Aotearoa, our neighbours, etc., and also take that on as we interact with panels such as this, but also developers, agents, and so on. Probably for me personally, you can't take away or can't take, probably the most enjoyable experience I've had is the ability to walk my rohi, to Pukerangiora rohi. And I know some of you here, the commissioners had the fortunate enough to experience that recently, and you were taken up to Pukerangiora Pa by our auntie Kuraniwa. And through those interactions with our sites as a hapu, where we form our basis of who we are, where we come from, and also where we want to go to as well. And when you go to Pukerangiora Pa, where we derive our name from, it's easy to note the history that has happened there, pre-European time, with interactions with iwi, with hapu, then interactions with the crown, and through the modern times, but also note our future interactions and aspirations for that site. And when I talk about that site, it's you can't just keep one site by itself. Pukerangiora Pa, derives us to who we are, to where we're from, but all these sites of significance for the hapu are like breadcrumbs of our history. And it's from those breadcrumbs, from each of the sites, all the sites within our rohi, as we form the basis of who we are. It's where we get our tikanga from, our whakapapa. It guides us now when we make decisions, when we write evidence such like this, when we sit down and have our wānanga, when we decide on things, what's our direction going to be. We always look back to these kōrero, or to these areas, to these sites, to inform about who we are. That's why they're important for us as well. So when you talk about our rohi, when you talk about our sites, you're really talking about a landscape, a cultural landscape, a historical landscape, a spiritual landscape as well. So a whole holistic part as well. So you stand up in Pukerangiora and you get a wonderful view of everything that's happened there and a touch of sense of the history. It's important important to know all the history around that side as well, our whenua, as why as we as a hapu see the important role of what we do as kaitiaki to look after that whenua for us, because it's guided us, it's carried us, but also for our future generations as well. I don't want to read it even it's out, but here I do want to note something in there around the whole process that I've just picked up that my cousins Joe and Jeff just talked about as well. That's just regarding the process and how we, the process started, the review started before I was officially involved in the management committee. One of our aunties sadly passed on. I worked alongside Dan McCurdy on this process. We haven't completed the process, and for us, the question is why haven't we? And we always ask it as a hapu. Yeah, it's a timing thing, but it's also a resourcing thing as well. And why submitting this evidence here, why the ability to have these discussions with our hapu, with our whananga, with here is important for us as well. And likewise, the ability to take you to our place, because we derive from that place, the connection to the place is important to us as well. So that's me, that's us. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Anaru. With that, Antoine, will ask you the same question, do something different? Are you there, Antoine?
Here we go. How's that? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I think Anaru preempted my question by sharing his role. And I suppose I'll ask the question in a slightly different way. In your evidence, you identify that you're part of the Pokerangi Ora Waihi Tapu Rōpū. And I just wondered if you could just explain what it's like to be a member on the Rōpū and what you do. I'm
like the, how would you say, I'm the person who's just the eager one there just to learn and ask these stories as well, from the whānau, from my aunties, uncles who there have got this knowledge. So it's a collection of whānau who have had these stories shared, who have walked the land for their whole entire life, and it's ability for them just to share that importance. And part of that role that we have is a resourcing around us as a hapu, but also that specific rōpū, the Waihi Tapu Rōpū, so we can actually be actively involved, so we can preempt things that come up, so we can participate fully in, I suppose, evidence and submissions like this as a rōpū. But for me personally, I wish it was my full-time job.
Wonderful. Just in terms of, you've said in your evidence that the list or the identification of many of these wāhi tapu and wāhi tupuna is an ongoing process, and it's something you feel you haven't finished yet. But just in terms of where we are now and with the proposed district plan, are you feeling comfortable about where you've got to on that journey? Do you feel like this is a good start?
Yep. Do I feel comfortable? I don't know if I would ever feel comfortable when talking about our sites in this process. I probably picked up an important note before about what information we do want to share and what information we want to hold to ourselves. Yes. We are aware that as part of a process that we need to share information, share corridor to protect these sites. And we're also aware there's some information there that we don't want in the public domain, or we as a hapu want to share because they're our stories as well. So level of comfort, possibly, have it's the ongoing process as well. That part of it is informs as well.
Thank you. Just in terms of, once you have some of these sites listed in the plan, then there's the other side, the obligation of when someone wants to go and do something, then they're going to ring up and say, hey, can someone come out to the site and have a look? We want to have a chat. So have you given much thought to how that might happen?
Yeah, we do. And I guess that's the basis of the Waihi Tapu, that when that happens, we've got a process with Te Kotaitanga, with the iwi. Okay. So obviously we involve Sarah Casey and the team there at Te Kotaitanga. Obviously we've got a hapu there. So it's almost a triangulation of things that happen in terms of the support, the technical support that we can get. Likewise, our corridor, our narrative to inform that as well, because I probably pick up on the big thing about extents and where that a lot of our extents haven't been mapped. How do we know the extents of certain areas of power sites? And that's for us where that triangulation of corridor data, we'll call it, is important. And that also includes archaeological evidence as well from there. So I know Dan McCurdy's been involved with Hapu, and we've got an ongoing relationship with Dan in terms of things as well. But I guess it's just understanding and bringing all that stuff together to say, what do we know? What evidence have we got? What's our corridor behind that as well?
Yeah, thank you for that. Mr. McCurdy had mentioned to us, I think it was yesterday or last week, that he was, I think it was yesterday, I'm losing my days, Monday it was, that he was sharing some nervousness, or maybe anxiety is the better word, anxiety about holding on to a lot of this information, and him wanting to either share it or have somebody else take up that burden. Did you have a view about, where the information should be held?
I do. We're getting approached quite a lot from educators, etc., around the information, and it's a big kaupapa for us in Hapu to, we want to know the stories, we want to share the stories, but we know that a lot of our Hapu don't know the stories for whatever reason. So that's important, that engagement connection piece. We know that a lot of information's held with few, and sadly those few are getting older as happens. So we're aware that a lot of its information is not stored anywhere. It's stored in someone's memory. It's stored in someone's corridor. It's the old oral tradition of crowd passing knowledge as well, as opposed to stuff that's written down. We do have some written corridor. We're looking at doing some more written stuff because there's a need and an aspiration of the Hapu, but we know there's some stuff there that you just can't share unless you've experienced it firsthand and actually can talk to it as well.
Yeah, kia ora for that. Tēnā koe, Anaru. Thanks very much for your answers today. That was all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Antoine. David?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Anaru. Hi, I've got your statement in front of me, and I had a couple of questions in relation to that, but just before I do, just picking up on one of the points that Antoine discussed with you, and that's when the Hapu is contacted by someone wanting to do something that may affect or may impact on a site or an extent, is there a resourcing issue involved with the Hapu and trying to give that the attention that it deserves and that you want to give it?
Yes, definitely. We don't have any employees as such as a Hapu. We're all volunteers. We're doing it because we want to, we love it, and it's who we are. That only goes so far in terms of being able to attend hui, to attend site visits as well. We know the importance of doing this and wanting to be there. Yes. So we can make sure that our taonga, that our whenua, our rohi is protected and we get the best outcomes.
Yes.
However, finding time, juggling whānau and other responsibilities is always an ongoing.
Yes, and I guess that creates frustrations for both sides.
It does, and I know the council here have a resource management opportunity fund here as well, and I know it's there things, but and that's obviously something that we're looking to do to resource people, but then it's there's the people resource as well, not just the monetary.
Yep, no, I just wanted to, I felt that was the case, and I just wanted to get that out on the table. Thank you for that. The two questions that I did have related to SASM ID 20017, and you've noted that Ms. Ritchie has recommended that be removed, and you've said that really you're not in a position to provide any evidence in respect to that recommendation. So can we take it from that whilst you might be uncomfortable with that, you're happy for that site to be picked up in the ongoing review that we've been discussing today?
Yes.
Yes, that's good. Thank you. And then my final question, Anaru, was just this concept, and it was a concept that was raised by Joe previously too, and that's this idea of a landscape of significance, and that the hapu request that the Rowie and be recognised and provided for as a landscape of significance. I'm just wondering what that might look like in the district plan. Have you given that any further thought?
No, not in regards to the district plan. However, when I look at the landscape of significance, and I think that's probably the big thing that I was talking about today, that's, you know, I focus things on Pukerangi Park. However, because I know you've been there, however, I know that all other sites are significant and they all interwoven to tell a holistic of who we are. So I would probably, within the district plan, would like that somehow to be shared, that you can't isolate sites as a particular site. Even Pukerangi Park, there's different parts there as well. So there's different pa, there's kāinga. So it's not just the pa as such. And that's an example that, you know, Pukerangi Pa, it's been mapped as Pukerangi Ora, it's been put down as a pa as Te Are, but Pukerangi Pa has actually been mapped. So that's just the whole property thing there as well. So that's when we talk about that landscape significance. It's not just one dot on a map. It's you know, multiple you know, factors and you know, things that contribute to this whole landscape. And it would be wonderful if that could be put into the plan as that such, as that these things are connected, just as we're connected to the hapu, to the iwi, to the land, to our whenua as well.
Yes, I think I understand exactly what you're saying. The concept that comes to mind is that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole.
Yeah.
Yes, it might be that there's not sufficient scope to deal with this as part of decisions on this notified plan, but I don't see why that couldn't be something that could be investigated in the ongoing review, and it might be subject to a future plan change or the next district plan review. So, look, thank you. Those answers were very clear. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Anna. I've got just a couple of one question and one comment. The question is about, again, in previous days, it might have been Monday, we did have some dialogue with, as the commissioners, with Joe and Maria, I think, about a protocol around silent files. And you mentioned information that was really important to know and for certain people to know, but it shouldn't really be in the public domain. And this is part of what Dan McCurdy, you know, he's the keeper of the information that's sort of scientific, archaeological maps, those sort of things. Whereas there's another keeper of the knowledge in terms of oral history that you were talking about. But where we got to with the staff team was particularly with information held by councils and sharing of that information once it gets into the building here. It's quite difficult to manage and control. Official information requests, people can request information. So we did ask that some work thought be put in before we make our decisions about, and because a lot of the hapu members are here today, because what I'm concerned about is that that information that needs to be silent needs to be very carefully managed and protected. If there's a protocol that's written, the council can know how to deal with requests, and there can be good reasons and things can be set up so people can't access those just through a newspaper or someone trying to find out. So just really getting a sense that, and I know it's been worked on, but we thought it should be brought forward as quite an important and urgent matter. So just any observations you have on that?
I just completely take all that. It's huge as an ongoing process, one that hapu would like to be involved with as well, a part of that process, because that is taonga for us. It's huge, you know, that corridor, and we're aware that the importance of sharing that for processes for us to protect them, and it's just that ongoing, you know, what does it actually look like for hapu? And for me, starting to have a lot of discussions with council and other projects and stuff, that whole, and this is bigger than, we're talking IP here, but this is bigger than IP. This is actually things that I don't have an answer to that. However, part of that process of what you say I support And on top of that, really would like Hapu to be involved with what that process looks as well. And again, probably goes back to that resourcing of the process as well.
But definitely, I think we've asked for some dialogue and Joe's got quite a lot on her plate at the moment, but we'll hopefully get to it. But there's some other Fuera and her team, some resourcing might go to that. And just one comment, our visit to Tukirangora Pa was very special. I'm a history buff. I've read a lot about those times in history through the 1800s. And just meeting your Auntie Kura Niwa, she told me we were walking back up and I was asking about Ringiora as a plant, she's telling me, so she actually saw it there. That was, certainly pretty unforgettable experience in terms of being there and just her such kindness and interest in us. And if you see her again, just thank you very much on our behalf. Or when you see her again, just to say, yes.
Oh, see her tomorrow night at a marae hui, so I can pass it on. And Auntie was very, afterwards she was really beaming. She loves taking people up there.
Yes.
So we talk about Pukerangi, you talk about Auntie Kura, and so to have the opportunity to take up, and also the interactions that she said had with yourself and the other commissioners, she said was just really special for her. So Auntie has a special time up at Pukerangi, then we appreciate it as well, because we're really lucky with her.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think we'll press on. Marlene, are you up next with Mutanga? You've circulated some information.
Yeah. We've got some coming speech. I'm doing it.
Uria matua ka I runga, uria matua ka I raro, uria ki uta, uria ki tai, uria ki au, uria ki au. Uria ngā tāngata, kia tā ai, titi aki I mō mātou nei winua, uria ngā kaupapa kia whakatairangi ia, I ngā mai o te taiao, uria nora, ngā taonga tuku I o ngā mātua tūpuna, ko tātou e kōrero ia nei e pāniki e rao ngā wāhi. Ngā wāhi tapu, ngā wāhi noho, ngā wāhi tūpuna. E ai ki te kōrero ko ngā noni ngā kumu, ko ngā punga e tau ngā. Nō reira, tēnei tui anōra kia koutou rā, mā kai komi ana, pai te kite, pai te tūtaki anōra, I roto I tēnei o ngā wāhi. Firstly, just wanted to start off with a karakia, and the particular karakia that we use really highlights the importance of our whenua to us as a people. And it's all about us coming together for the betterment of our whenua, for the betterment of our land, for the betterment of our environment, for the betterment of the places and the taonga, the gifts that our tūpuna left for us. And the ability for us to then ensure that their aspirations, their wishes, their dreams are fulfilled through our actions. And today is one of those days where we can have the opportunity to be able to talk about our particular submission and the components within that submission. Just want to acknowledge as well the commissioners and the team for coming to Ngāti Mutunga to stand on our whenua, to see some of the sites, to listen to some of our kōrero, some of our narratives, some of our history, and get some insight from a local perspective as to the reasons why these places are really significant for us and really important for us. With the dispossession of land that's occurred over a number of generations through from the confiscations through until now, we've seen a lot of destruction of our wāhi tapu. With the dispossession of those lands, the alienation from those particular places, we lose a sense of connection, and the stories to a certain extent also get lost to a point where a very significant past site over 200 years ago can now just be seen as a hill in the paddock. What we want to do is, one, to ensure that those places are recognised, they're catered for within these types of plans. But in addition to that, there's also an ability to regenerate, together, collate some more of that corridor and start sharing it out again, not only to our whānau, but to our wider communities, who are also asking for that information so that they feel a sense of place as well, where they're growing up and where they're learning. And that's a big goal, a big aspiration for us. So I've just got a couple of statements that I just want to read before I hand it over to Marlene to then take us through the presentation. So with the disposition of our land came the eventual destruction of our places of significance. Our past sites, Papakainga, Mara, Mahinga Kai, and even our urupa were severely impacted by progress in the form of roading, infrastructure, construction, erosion, and industry. And in the submission, you'll see the type of impact and destruction that's occurred on a number of our sites. So with the destruction of and alienation of our sites comes the loss of knowledge and connection to those sites. Therefore, as kaitiaki of our area will believe that it's crucial that the remaining sites are treasured, valued, protected, and remediated to ensure that they can become places that our people and communities can reconnect with in meaningful ways. Ngāti Mutunga also has a long-standing history in working with NPDC and reviewing our Waitapu sites, and did undertake, as noted in submission, a very extensive Waitapu review with our community. But just wanted to also acknowledge NPDC and the team for the amount of money that's happened over this last 30 years throughout this review process. However, as you'll see in our submission, we feel that there's still some more things to do. There's 4 areas that we outline in the submission in terms of specific outcomes that we recommend for the Waitapu over the life of the proposed district plan. So one being that all remaining sites are protected. 2, that in all instances, the appropriateness of an activity on any site of significance is informed by Ngāti Mutunga. 3, the proposed district plan recognises and provides for Ngāti Mutunga ability to effectively exercise our kaitiakitanga in these places. And 4th, the opportunities to reflect, acknowledge and amplify these sites in the built form, in architecture, in the streetscape, in landscaping and daily use of these areas are actively sought and required through the provisions of the proposed district plan. We feel it's imperative that the plan supports our ability to practice kaitiakitanga over our sites, and it is important that the plan also allows for accidental fines and the addition of these sites between plans. Another point to note is that most people carrying out these activities may, especially those who have a negative impact on our sites, have little or no experience in trying to navigate district plans. For this reason, the wording of policies, objectives and rules needs to be as simple and clear as possible. We've also outlined a couple of problems that we think should be addressed through the E-plan. And those 3 items are scale, silent file notation, which you had mentioned previously, 200 metre effect from site with no extents. So you'll see it again in the submission, we've outlined our particular points of view. But what we do know or note is that with the destruction of these sites, as I mentioned earlier, comes a loss of knowledge, the loss of connection. So we really hope that that is quite clear through our submission and through the number of other submissions that you received on this particular matter. With that, I'll pass it to Marlene.
Kia ora, I did a lot of pictures so you could look at them and not at me. Just keep going to bring them up. We sort of wanted to give you some examples after when I was writing the submission. I went through and worked out what had done what damage to how many of our sites, and I got quite surprised that the most damage had been done by farm trees. But some of the significant damage is done by the number of buildings that have been actually put right on top of the sites. So here you've got examples, we've got a scout hall, we've got a really flash house that started off as a quarry. We've got the Illinois Golf Club house, which is on a really important kainga site, and then we've just got someone's shed. And as you can see, some of these buildings have been built quite recently. It didn't all happen 30 or 50 years ago. Some of them have been on there quite recently. The next thing I know, there's been a bit of discussion about farm tracks, and this was the thing we found out had damaged the most sites, which was a bit surprising, but I guess because the way the topography goes, it's easier to put your track along the edge of a park site. One of the problems I've got with Federated Farmers wanting it to be able to be extended from the footprint is that it is really hard at the moment to get this rule enforced anyway. The site on the left is Te Ngaiapa. Now, for some reason, and this happens with car sites, they have done work on that track about 6 or 7 times, and each time they have moved it back further into the car site, so that we've actually lost some really beautiful kumara pits. Now, every time they do it, because it's near a really popular white baiting spot, so I get rung up when anyone puts a bulldozer up there. We've rung the NPDC, but we can't prove that it's not within the original footprint. So I would really, although we're pragmatic about the need for tracks to be safe, we're really uneasy about giving people any more rights to extend farm tracks from the footprints that they're at the moment, because we've found that rule's unenforceable anyway. So you can see the amount of damage you can do with farm tracks. Yeah. Okay, next one. This is my favourite thing, infrastructure. And I think this is the thing that we've had the most battle with in Ngāti Mutu. It's not actually the people that own the land themselves, it's the people who think they've got the right to come there and put in infrastructure. So it's the people that are doing the seismic surveys, it's the people who are putting up their power poles. There's a power pole on the right, there's a trig on the one on the left. The one down the bottom is a bit sneaky me putting this in, because this is actually ultra fast broadband, and evidently they don't need resource consents anyway because they're so important. But they actually agreed with us that they would not dig up anywhere on our power site without us being there. And I looked out the office door one day on my way to get a cup of coffee, and there they were happily digging that hole right on the top of Kumara. So I had to get out and say, no, you can't do this, and have a big argument with them, and they're saying, yes, we can. And the people in charge said, no, they're not with us, they're someone else's. The one, so I think there's a range of how you put the rules into practice, and I've found that where you need the rules to be strongest and where we need to be able to put our foot down and say, no, you cannot do this, is with people putting infrastructure in. It's not actually the people that live there and own it. You know, you can negotiate with them. Some of them aren't so flesh, but usually we can talk to them. It's people, and interestingly, the people that we've had the most trouble with is the Auckland District Council. And a really good example of that is that one on the right. They are digging and putting in a new septic tank that's on Ornido Beach Camp, which Ngāti Mutunga actually owns. They didn't tell us about it. It is about 5 metres away from an uru farm, and you don't know that the fence is in the right place. So that is definitely something we would have monitored really strongly, and we also would have gone and done a karakia before they dug the uru. We only found that by accident because I happened to be down the beach. We take keeping the people working on the power sites, putting the infrastructure and their safety seriously. We've got a protocol that we go into a karakia before they start any major program. We feed them a cup of tea. We tell them they can come and get us anytime. So for us, it's as much about keeping them safe as it is about keeping our sites safe, and that is really important. And also, we've found it really improves the respect they have for the sites, because they know how important they are to us, and also the food helps. The next one, I think we're going to try and talk to you about this in the rural productive side. This is something that really annoys me, that they've really got stronger and stronger rules about taking plantation forestry off power sites, and actually it can be really expensive and you can be made to do it with a helicopter, but there's nothing warning people about planting the sites, telling them that it's not actually a good thing to do. So I still have people ringing me up saying, oh, can I put some pine trees on the power site? I get them to talk to other landowners that have had trouble and the expense of getting them off without damaging it. It is impossible, even if you are really, really careful, to get a pine tree off a power site without extensive damage. It's really hard.
But Marlene, maybe just pause there because we certainly Rangiora, we were told about pine plantations and what a lot of damage they've done. I think there might have been even a couple of crops and pulled out, and that came to our attention. But we also had a discussion yesterday just about when David and I were involved in the Kapiti District Plan Review from 5 or 6 longer, forestry and how that impacted on both SASMs and natural areas was a big topic. We've since had the national planning standard for forest harvesting.
National Environmental Standards of Plantation.
Forestry, yes. So I'm not an expert on that, but no, you're not either. Joe, and we just had an observation from someone who said, well, probably the reason we're not dealing with forestry and forestry planning is that it's actually been overtaken. But there's, I know in our commissioners team, we will need to think about that, and that will probably come up in the rural.
We did
production stuff.
say that it should be a restricted discretionary activity within the rural product, but that didn't get picked up by the section 42. I just read it last week. Yeah.
Yes. So, but you did have a submission about that.
And we are going to talk about it at that hearing about whether that's the appropriate place to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's this chapter or the rural productive chapter, but we want people to take the pine trees off. Like we always support it when they fly, because when they fly over, they do huge damage. But you cannot get them off there without totally trashing the site, in my opinion.
Because of the big machines.
The big machines, how you've got to fool them, you've got to get tracks to pull them out, even if they're really, really careful. Yeah.
Okay. I thought just it's not a loose end, but it's something that we just have to be over. So thank you. Carry on.
The next one I want to talk about was grazing and cultivation. I'll just put these in. We're probably lucky in Narimanoo because we don't have a lot of intensive dairy farming. But to me, obviously people have to be able to graze their land and stuff like that. But the effect of it can be that you can totally destroy the earthworks. If you put enough cows in a small paddock on a weekday, enough hungry cows, they will remodel the whole park for you. There's a lot of bit of damage there that's a bit hard to see, but that was from some cows that were at that site. Now we haven't had cows there for 10 years and the damage is still there. It is actually an urupa. So it's more, okay, grazing's all right, but should they be able to graze it that it causes damage? Just these, and that's the whole point. I drive past, I think it's mainly in Puketapu, and I see some of the cows on their power sites and it makes me want to cry. We're really lucky because our dairy farmers are a bit more laid back and they don't have many cows and they don't tend to. Of course, it never rains and everything makes them all right. The other thing I want to talk about was cultivation. If you look back, and I went and read to do the submission, I went and read all the site files from the old archaeological ones, because I've noticed that in the ones that were done in the 60s and earlier always put that ploughing had been a big damage and that grazing had been a big damage. And I think it's the way that they ploughed, because they had those huge, and so that would damage the earthworks. So that did significant damage to our power sites and ruined some of the features back then. If you talked to us 20 years ago, we would have said that cultivation wasn't a problem. However, since then, everyone in our rohis got into growing maize. And it's not the actual sowing or the harvesting of the maize that does all the damage, it's the tidying up of the paddock so that it makes it easy to do the cultivation. And there's that real, thing that people will flatten things out to make it easy when they come to do the harvesting and the planting. And I've got uncles who are dairy farmers and they're constantly doing that, and I'll just tidy that up, which is fine unless it's a pā site. So we had one landowner who decided to tidy up his pā site, and he filled in all this beautiful goomer bits with dirt. He just went and filled them all in because that made it tidy. He didn't see he was doing any damage. He just saw that as part of normal farming practices to tidy something up. So I think there's times when different things do damage, and at the moment, the amount of maize cultivation and the amount of landscaping they do to plant it is causing damage to some of our sites. Does that make sense? And that's something that I think comes and goes. The next bit, this is a road that's gone straight through the pā site. We've got a few of those. Probably not the best picture, but as you can see, the pā site would have gone right across the road. And now you can drive right through the middle, but there are people buried there too. I don't know what you can call them. The next bit, there's nothing much you can do about this. This is coastal erosion. Yeah, and it's a huge problem in Ngāti Marunga. Our coastline's just galloping back. One of the problems is when you combine coastal erosion with infrastructure, and in the picture on the far right, that's the Onairo campground wastewater system, and it's on the top there, and the dispersal field. So now the dispersal fields for the wastewater system for the Onairo campground are within 5 metres of that coastline. And so we've got big concerns about that material ending up in the sea, but also what happens to the wastewater at the campground when that happens. I just thought I'd do this site. I don't know if you can see it that well. Sorry, it's very blue. This is just one site, Maru Eke, which is a really important site to Ngāti Marunga because it's where Rushina was born. And some sites just seem to have everything happen to them. So this one's got coastal erosion. It comes back, and then you've got the dispersal fields for the sewage system at the campground, and then you've got the reservoir for the backup water supply at the campground. And I think one of the problems with infrastructure on pā sites is that it's there, but you also have to keep maintaining it. And so you get this constant people saying, oh, we just need to dig this up again. Oh, yeah, we just need to dig this up again. So there's that ongoing balancing between protecting your pā site. But in Ngāti Marunga, we've taken a really strong stand on the sewage being in really good and not ending up in the awa. So we sort of have to go along with them digging it up to fix it up, otherwise it's all going to end up in the sea. So this site's got coastal erosion, dispersal fields for the wastewater, the reservoir for the wastewater, which they spent about 2 weeks digging up last year because they couldn't find it turned on. The house for the track and also the golf club, all on our one Manuiki site, which is really important because it's the pā by the coast, but then it goes back to the Kāinga where the people lived when they came back from the Chathams. So there's about 300 people living up there. And it's got, they found amazing stuff on that site, from really fresh crockery to moa bone walls, moa bone carving things. So it's a really important site for us. The next one is a really bad picture. Sorry. So this is, we tried really hard, me and Emery took this picture about 10 times. So you've got the beautiful Tukikini pā site on the right, which is this complex of 4 or 5 defended with tihi and all that. And in the middle of it, they found, when they did some scrub in the 60s, they found this really neat dam that was the water source for the people that are up there. It's a really cool hole. Me and Hurumana are probably the last people who climbed it from the bottom, because everyone else since then have done their 4-wheel drives halfway up, but we didn't have 4-wheel drive, so we had to walk from the bottom. And this is an example to me of the why we need landscape thing, because you can't see it on this, but if you come down the ridge, there's a slight thing where they put the cell phone tower. So you've got these 4 really important sites here. You've got the cell phone tower that they put up during lockdown, and then on the bottom you've got another site. And this is where that idea of a landscape comes in, because this is the thing that I've had most people in Ngāti Marunga have a go at me for not being able to prevent, because that's my job to stop them doing things like this. because it's ruined how they see that iconic view of Tuku Kiniki. Now it's got the sailboat thing, and also all we needed was a conversation. Like the people who put that cell phone tower up, they went into MPDC, asked them, said was there any concerns, and because it was outside the 50 metres between like power on both sides of it, yeah. They said, oh no, it's fine, you can put it there. And when I finally got hold of them and rang them up, they said, oh, because we could have put it somewhere else. So it's how you put these things on plan so that they're not discrete things, that they are part of being joined together, so that we can have those conversations.
Marlene, I think that's so right. Most of the utility people that I know and work with, they're really careful about these things, but they don't know. So this is one of the reasons why I think the step change in notifying or the progress that's been made in this plan as opposed to the previous one is so important.
Yeah.
Because particularly mapped information will be looked at quite carefully by these sort of people if they actually know. So and there's always different solutions.
Yeah.
Particularly for repeater stations and things.
Yeah, and that would have been, they had 2 sites, they put on the other one.
Yeah, okay.
They had one phone call from me, it would have been fine. So that's been really heartbreaking. That's been one of the worst things that happened to me since I've done this job.
Yeah.
And this is also, we talked a bit about the height of buildings, and someone brought up the thing about the height of buildings does not affect the archaeological values of the site, which is quite right, but it has a huge effect on the cultural value of that site, because sometimes the whole point of the site is what you can see from it and what you can see out to it. So if you're sitting there and you're looking down and there's this great big tall structural building in the way, the sense of that site is gone, because the sense of where that site was put was put there so it could see down there. This is before we all got cell phones and we could ring each other up, we had to see each other. So yeah, I think that was someone brought up about the role about buildings outside the 50 metres. And that's why that's such an important rule for us, and why we wanted to put it back in, because of that views from and views to. Yeah, so that was protected. Okay, and the next slide's about Kaipapa. So I don't know if you want to ask some, which is the particular submission against our site here. So I don't know if you want to ask questions now, or just to get going and finish this, but I know we're taking a bit of time and yet
no, it's important to go through. I think just to explain the highlights for this power, and then I think we'll move to the end of your presentation and ask questions.
So Huri Moana this is from where Whānau's from, so she can answer any questions you've got. I think what we wanted to point out was we have worked really hard with Mr. Houghton about that. This is a really important site, and it is one of the sites that would fit into the landscape view of how you protect it. We've always been available to meet. We've had about 20 meetings about this. We've provided all the information available. We've been really honest and upfront about our reasons for opposing some of the ideas he had, or they had, or where they wanted to build their houses. One of the main things about why we did not want him to build houses on the right-hand side of the road looking down, so that's the northeastern side, was that because we don't think it's safe for him and his whānau to live there, and no one from Ngāti Marunga would live there, and we need to be upfront with him about that. We have worked really hard and compromised to find him a suitable house site on the western side of the road, which is outside the Urupa, and we actually have let him do some earthworks and put some of his house within the 50-metre buffer, which we wouldn't normally do, but we wanted to be reasonable about him having somewhere he could live on that site. So that's a picture there. You've got the Urupa itself is a gazetted Urupa, it's still in use. There's no access to it other than through the Houghtons, and we appreciate the way he's negotiated that with us. The extent south of that is what the geometria put on, so that does have archaeological values in there, and I don't think anyone's challenging that site. The site, the biggest site, if you go down to the next slide, the red slightly, which is the site for 433, is something that Ngāti Mutinga put on. This is a really iconic place for Ngāti Mutinga. There's a lot of very important things happened there. It was probably a really early settlement and got occupied way through to the 1930s on the western side of the road. But some really important things happened there. That's the site where Ngāti Mutinga took refuge from when Waikato invaded. They came up from Puhokura. It's also the only site where there was actual armed fighting between the Crown and Ngāti Mutinga. And we know, although they can't, this is what is quite annoying about having to find archaeological things. We know that there were rifle pits all the way on the front because we know the people who invaded talked about there being rifle pits all the way along the front. Yeah, they're not there because the farmers bulldozed them, but that doesn't mean to say that's not still important. It had important ceremonial things. Rurimu Kingi Turangitaki lived there for a while. So yeah, you couldn't get a more important site to us. And I think if you go to the next slide, what annoyed us somewhat about there too was that if we find archaeological stuff, we'll just avoid that and we can put our houses there. Whereas there may not be remaining archaeological stuff there, but how did the people get from the power site to the Urupa? Did they sort of fly or something? You know, it's obviously part of a continuum. It was well used and it had some really important events happen there. And also one of our main reasons for opposing him building on that site is because we don't think it's safe. Do you say anything?
No, you put it in a nutshell, I think, no.
I mean, we did also have to trouble behaviour of the archaeologist because he went and dug there knowing that there was archaeological material there without getting an archaeological authority, and we did complain about that to the Historic Places Trust and they supported our complaint. That's nothing to do with the owners, that wasn't there doing it, it was the archaeologist's behaviour. If we would not have ever supported anyone digging there, and if they were going to dig there, we would certainly go and done a karaki there to keep the place safe and keep them safe. We didn't appreciate him just going in there and digging at all. Yeah, and he did find stuff, and so he should have gone to more trouble than he did. Anyway.
You were listening in yesterday?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. And obviously comments about you telling us that you would support a cultural values perspective or a sort of significance perspective. Any sort of housing on that eastern side of the road.
And not saying that we're quite happy to talk to them again. You know,
Yes.
we're very happy to do that. We've talked to them a lot, given them all the information, and we're quite happy to give them any information. There's nothing that we talked about today that we wouldn't share with them, and we have shared with them. Yeah, we have a real thing about you know, providing information to landowners so that they know where things are and why they're important to us, because we find that that works with us.
Yes, and that comes through. I have to say my experience is good things normally come out of engagement.
Yeah.
It's where there's just an inability to engage from either side where the trouble starts quite often. So, you know, we've heard often, you know, the open engagement, that's fantastic. I understand Mr. Kiss is going away and coming back with some plans about how he might think the, so that will need to be shared, obviously.
Yeah, as far as we know, the council's going to give him resource because it's for his house on
the western side.
Yeah, and we have no plans in front of us for anything else. We haven't, there's nothing on the table at the moment for anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, so and when if it comes on, we'll very happy to talk.
Good, thank you,
Always
Martin.
happy to talk.
Right, well, I think let's just go to questions, starting with you, Antoine.
Hey, thank you very much. Kia ora, Marlene. Thanks very much for your submission. I always look forward to your presentations because you often give us some real examples, because often we're talking in, I wouldn't want to say theoretical, but, you know, with policy and objectives, and the rules are getting closer to it, but it's good to see the correlation between the policy framework and then what you're dealing with, the key issues on the ground. So I really appreciated you taking the time to put together the presentation to show us some examples, and they were theme-based, so that's helpful not only for this chapter but also other chapters that my colleagues may be sitting on. So just acknowledgement of the time and effort for putting the presentation together and it being really relevant and meaningful. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I'm asking everybody, and then I've got some specific questions, particularly in regards to the example that you've just given about that. So just what, if you could just take a moment just to talk us through the process of identifying SASMs with the council and just how long you've been involved, how you've found that.
Frustrating, but you know, we probably started this the time before in the 1990s. The council had an effort about moving them into the right place, and then one and another woman went and trundled around as many of our sites as we could get to. We were a lot skinnier and fitter, and then we had it gave you a total respect about how fit the people who built those sites and who lived on it, which has never left me about and how important it is to go and stand on them and look where you can see from them and have a real think about how you live there, because that's often missed. So we did that. We put them now. We made the decision about out to lunch probably that all the sites, because all the land in Ngāti Mutunga was Waihi Tapu, we made this decision to make all our files silent files, because what we were finding was that the councillors were making, the council staff were making decisions about how far you had to be away before it was affected by an activity. And so it was fairly random where the little triangle ended up within the property about whether they talked to you or not. So we thought we'd get around that by saying that within that legal description we wanted to be talked to. It didn't work because the council staff still made decisions about where it had randomly ended up within the property. So we didn't get it, we ended up with some sites not being protected by that. So reluctantly, when the next review came back, and I think we were one of the first iwi to participate in, and I really want to mention Rena and Kelly Wallace, because they did all the hard work for this, and yeah, they did an amazing job. They trundled around and kept up with Dan and Russell trudging up and down all the hills. They did have a 4-wheel drive, I'd say, so it wasn't quite as tricky as we were doing it. Yeah, and the decision was made by Ngāti Mutunga to move away from silent files, except in some examples, and to map the extents as best they can. So they actually did the groundwork for that, and then Kelly unfortunately died, so I worked with Rena for a while on that, and so we did all the verifying and the negotiating of where to put the extents, and I reckon that is one of the trickiest things. You know, but we just, when we needed to, we just put our foot down and said, no, okay, that's the archaeological bit, but this is the bit that's important to us, okay? And we found it quite easy to work with Dan on that, yeah. And occasionally he even came around to our way of thinking, because occasionally afterwards he found all the archaeological stuff that he'd missed the first time. So yeah, but that is a real tricky thing. We have checked that. Dan, what is it? Schedule? I've been looking at that schedule since 2016. We were supposed to have a plan change like Ngāti Rākiri. We were supposed to come in after them and do a plan change just for the site. So that's why we put all that effort for a year, getting all our landowners in, having cups of tea, baking untold cakes for them, and to make sure they knew so that when it came to they would be all right with it. So it was really frustrating when that didn't happen and we didn't get them on to 2019, because by then the landowners had changed and some of that work they'd done sort of got a bit wasted. Yeah. But it was good. It's a really good way to do it. Yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. We had very few difficult discussions, but you need to be able to have hard discussions with people, and I think the more information you give to them up front before they make their decisions, that's why I think having really good information in the plan is really important, because sometimes people buy a property and they think that is where I'm going to put my house, and of course that's on the pass side, and if they've got that in their head, it's really hard to get it out of their head. And of course, Ngāti Moringa, it's not stupid, we put the parasites on the best places to put them. So we've already been there first, so sorry.
I thank you for that. You've probably answered my second question, which was fine, but just around extent and it being quite tricky business. So thank you for that.
It is tricky, yeah.
Just in regards to my last two questions, they're kind of connected, and I'll just start with this. And just when we heard Dr. Hans-Dieter Bauer yesterday, he was suggesting to us that we, and this is something that I neither agreed with or disagreed with, though he was just making a statement. He said we should be thinking about the archaeology of the district as clusters of features. And this is something I encountered when I was doing Plan Change 40. The sort of, we had, at that time we had two archaeologists. I don't know if you were at some of those hearings, but it was comical at sometimes where we had two archaeologists arguing with each other, not too dissimilar to perhaps two economists or two landscape architects. It was at times quite comical. And they were taking two polarized view, one, focusing in on the feature and the site, and the other taking a more, I consider, considered approach, context and perhaps, and maybe sometimes landscape. I just wondered if you think there's a shift that we're currently going through where we're moving from thinking about the feature and even clustered features to sites and areas and landscape.
I think what needs to be protected is the things that are important to Ngāti Moringa and the way they live there. So you cannot do that just by protecting the bits of earthworks that are left. Because the earthworks were often not the important bit. Like, I'm a really keen gardener. So to me, the important bits, and wherever I go to a pathway, I always think, where would you have put your garden? And we're lucky enough to have some of those sites where they've ploughed the land and you can see where the gardens were. So, that is really important and that needs to be protected. So, no, I think it is still too weighted, like everyone has said, towards things you can see in archaeological features and not weighted enough to, the cultural values or the importance of that site to the people who have lived there forever, and the importance of maintaining those sites and the connections between the bits you can see to make people, younger people, be able to make sense of how their people used to live there. And that's really important because, it's like when you write about wars, you get all the exciting bits where people killed each other and you don't get all the bits about where people got married and had kids in between them. It's the things that we protect tend to be the things that are associated with conflict, not with how people lived. And most of the time, people were just living there. And that's what needs to be recognised in the district plan and what we protect. I think that's really, really important. Otherwise, you get it skewed.
Thank you. I'm just writing some notes here. My last question, and I'm going to apologise beforehand because I can't quite see your body language. So I'm just going to ask the question, and then you can choose whether you want to answer it or not, or how you might want to answer it. This is in regards to the example you gave at the end of your presentation, and it's timely because we heard from the landowner yesterday. This is in regards to Kaipikari road sites. And my question is, just putting aside some of the issues that you've had in terms of the way in which the archaeological survey was done, if that was done in an appropriate and sensitive way, is that an example of good practice in terms of engagement with yourselves, consideration of archaeological features, and then your response in terms of, we think this is the appropriate place where building platforms or envelopes could occur? And I do note that this is a process that hasn't quite finished yet, but does that have aspects of a good practice, or is this quite unusual and not something that you really are supportive of?
We're not supportive of people digging things up for the sake of it, to find where you can't put your house. So digging, no. going and having a look, fine, even some of that infra. They do those ritzy machines and push it around, because we've used those.
Geometric magnetic surveys and etc. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine, but it needs to be balanced with, that is not the only important bit about that site, okay? Because A, a lot of that can have been destroyed, and B, other things can happen there that leave no mark ever, you know, so yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah, digging, no, digging to find out where you can put your house is ridiculous.
So maybe if it was a methodology that employed non-intrusive means, methodologies that didn't necessarily involve earthworks, those types of things, those are the things you're open to?
Yeah. If that's going to help us protect it and map the site, yeah. But we need to be very clear that that's not the be all and end all of why you protect a site, is if you can find a bit of earthworks, because it's not.
Thank you. That was all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Antoine. David.
Yes, good afternoon, Marlene. I've been listening intently. I just have one question, and it's drawing on the last conversation you had with Commissioner Cotton. I guess what I'm really interested in knowing is, once an extent of a site is mapped and it's included in the plan, as is the case with the landowner of the Houghtons, what's your take on the significance of that extent in terms of whether it should or shouldn't allow any development?
We considered our extents really carefully, okay? We didn't just put them on willy-nilly, and, you know, because we knew that they were going to affect people's lives, so we wanted them to be meaningful. So we did put them around, first of all, on places that we thought needed protecting, and then places that we would not be happy people living. So those were the two things we thought about really hard. That does not mean that we're not happy to talk about it afterwards. We expected this site to get challenged. So yeah, it's just the process of how that will happen. Yeah, because we didn't have archaeological support for all of it. And it is a large site. Yeah, but you know, balance for that. That's a very iconic site for Ngāti Mutunga. It's a really important site.
So you expect a process to be generated by the presence of it?
Yeah, and we have been in sort of that process for a long time, because they keep coming to us with ideas, and then they go away and come back again. We say, well, we don't want that because of that, but they haven't ever put those ones that we haven't into the council to see sort of who wins, to get what I mean. So at the moment, it's the only application they have made, we have supported. Yeah, the only application they've made into the district council.
Yes.
A bit of, you know, moving around and that we have supported. So that's where it is for us. We were a bit surprised about them wanting it taken off, because in their application for the house, they said they recognise that the site's so yeah, we thought we got somewhere with them, but obviously, and that's fine, we're quite happy to keep talking. Yeah.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is that the outcome of that process, when the rubber hits the road with the resource consent, is not necessarily predetermined by the extent listing. There could be different outcomes depending on the sensitivity of the site.
Yeah, and we already have compromised about that site. We wouldn't let anyone put their house within 50 metres of any other site, but we knew that we had to be reasonable, and we knew that it was important that they had somewhere that they could build their house that they were happy with up there, that for us that we could live with, and so that's what we came to. Yeah.
Yes.
So it is. We have moved from the absolute of where the extent was. Yeah.
Yes. So where these questions are driving is that some submitters have suggested that the inclusion of an extent and the planning rules that are associated with it could be interpreted as a preclusion or a prohibition of any development occurring. And I'm hearing from you that that's not necessarily the case. Is that
that would depend entirely on the site, though. Yeah, some sites that would we would definitely never want anyone to, because of the damage that would have been done. Yeah.
Does that create a problem in the sense that sites themselves, and well, let's forget about sites, that just focus on extents, but the same applies to sites. There's no hierarchy in the district plan about the relative importance between various sites and various extents. They're all treated as the same. Does that create a problem in terms of whether there's a consent pathway or not, or what your expectations are?
I think you could, like, to me, you get around that by using landscapes, because I think within landscapes you'd have a hierarchy. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do see what you mean, but that's not what's in front of us, is it?
I know, and that's why I really think landscapes would be a good way to go. Because at the moment, we have so little left that I'm sort of a bit reluctant to say that we would move too much on where we've put the extents, because we think the extents are all quite reasonable and quite,
Now, my question wasn't about suggesting that the extent should be shifted or not. It's just what the expectation is once an extent's been included in the plan.
Okay, so say that expectation from us was that within the extent nothing would be done that we would consider would damage the site. Yeah, but we still always talk to people. Yeah.
Yes, so I mean, I noticed within your written brief of evidence, you've made a lot of comments on the rules and the policies and the objectives, which cover what can and can't be put on a site. So there are certain permitted activities. Rule 1, you've commented on that.
Yeah.
Where new structures on an extent are concerned, they're a discretionary activity.
Yeah.
Does that align with your expectations?
We would probably be opposing any new, we've got enough power sites with houses on anyway, so we would, and the damage that's done, so yeah, new structures we would, as a rule, oppose, yeah.
So the discretionary activity is a fully discretionary, it requires a resource consent.
Yeah.
Council can approve or decline it.
Yeah, but through the resource consent process, we would, as a rule, oppose new structures, yeah.
Right, so as a party to the consent, you would lodge a submission. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I understand that. Okay, no, that's been a useful dialogue. Thank you for that. Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, thank you both. I just have one question, and it does go to a really important issue that's difficult. So we all understand that archaeology can show us just from the shape of the land and evidence that can be, some of it can be identified through machine, like geomagnetic surveys or something else to get an imagery in that way of doing archaeology is just going ahead leaps and bounds in terms of satellites and you name it, where that's going to end up. But the other element you mentioned, Marlene, is I'm not sure the right word with this, wairua, or just the fact that people know today through oral history and other written records that certain places are places that you wouldn't want to live. They're tapu, yes?
Yeah. And that's a lot about the Houghton's place. Yeah. Yeah. And you can't find that out with a machine. There's no machine that can do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in planning terms, that intangible
is really hard.
Is hard.
Yeah.
It's not like we can see for significant natural areas and bush on the land, and we know what the trees are, but that's a real thing, isn't it?
It is. It's a real thing, and it's also that responsibility of manaakitanga that Ngāti Maranga takes particularly seriously about making sure that people do not build where they shouldn't or live where they shouldn't, where we think that they're not safe. And if you can communicate that with people, we have one site that I went to and I went home and had nightmares. We took those people back and they decided they didn't want to build there. So if you're respectful enough and communicate that we don't think you're safe there and they take it seriously, then that works. They actually went off and built somewhere else, which was a really good outcome, because we have had people that have built on places through it not being properly on the plan who really regret it because they realise, and we would have told them not to build there, but they have because they're on the wrong, because of the placements of the triangles being in the wrong places. And they you know, they really regret building there, yeah.
So, so I think, you know, your answers are quite important because extents do need to cover, in your opinion, both physical rental groups and places that you know are places that probably aren't good places to live because of the tapu.
Otherwise, they're meaningless to extent, aren't they? They're not doing what they're designed for.
Yes. Okay, and certainly we did hear some examples from Te Pueo, Campbell and Anaruwuki when we were on a tour about some places and some sites where it was being difficult to stay there for the people that have built houses. So I just wanted to actually get that sort of in the discussion because it's not an easy discussion. It's not understood by everyone and probably not believed by some.
No, and that's fine. That's their choice. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you just rounded it all up really, but this site lasted all my lifetime, and I'm not a spring chicken. I've lived in Urianui all my life, and we have been raised to understand what has happened on that particular piece of land on that past site. Our family is buried in the Urupa there, in the top Urupa, and our family have lived there, and when we were struggling to find a site that we felt would be okay for Mr. Horton to build on, we put it where we knew it would be okay, principally because that's where the body of our whānau was, and our whānau would never have built anywhere where they shouldn't. And there's been a whole lot of tragedy on Kaipikiri Farm. We have been attacked twice by the soldiers up there. There's a site of 2 Paimari there poles, the ho-hos with them. And we have, particularly our whānau, because it's we have been raised with the don't go here and don't go there stories, and being warned about things that we shouldn't be doing on that particular property. So with Mr. Horton, I feel that where we decided it would be okay for him to put his home, he will remain safe there. It is what our intention was from the word go. The rest of it, there's so many different things. No doubt we have all the information on Kaipikiri, which we have, and it's very difficult to find another site, I guess. It's not that we want to prevent them from building. Because for me, the past site is the whole hill. So you're going down into what you call an SNA to the stream, which obviously is a geographical feature anyway around the base of the pa. And I think if you're not going to include the whole pass site as a pass and call it a pass site, well then it'll be only like you saying, well, hi, but only my head is here, not the rest of my body. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. I think that is how we feel as Ngāti Mutunga about it.
Thank you for that, Moana. I think that's very wise. And Mitchell, thank you for your kōrero. And Marlene, it's always a pleasure you pretend you're not, you've got a wonderful way about expressing history and important real things, so really appreciate you coming and talking to us. I think it's time to have a wee break. Let's make it 5 minutes or so for a break, and we'll come back just after 20 minutes.
If we
Are we on? Are we back on? Yes. Right. It's a relief, I must say. So I think Donna was up next, but you were wondering whether Namahanga Atari could do it first, but we've lost Tane, so. Okay, well, let's just, if that's the best thing to do, let's just take a breather until Tane comes back.
I think it's Commissioner fair to say that Ngāti Rahiri will be moved to
Yes,
another day.
keep, I think that would be good.
May I still stay there?
Yeah, of course. This is open session, so.
Small thing for a small thing.
Tane, I think we're going to move you into the next slot. Mahanga Kauri.
Ia kia tātou. Ngā kaimahi o te kainihira, iana ngā commissioners, iana kia tātou. Ngā ahika o te rohi nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. A porangi ko whapapa puta porongo, ko tāne mahuta, ko tāngoro, ko tūmatawinga, ko ori e tiki, ko tāpore mātia, te kona te rangi ki rongo, papakiraro, ka puta te ire tangata ki te waiao, ki te ao marama. Tihei mauri ora. I'm not too sure where we want to how we want to roll with this. I've just got some corridor here to share.
Yes, we've had your evidence, Tane. So probably just talk us through that. You may or may not want to read that through. Over to you. Because it's just a short statement, but if you want to give some highlights, it's all cool as well. So just in your hands, really.
Yeah, some of the things I wanted to talk about is the spiritual interaction. Some of the kōrero that we've heard today. Myself personally, and some of my experiences on our marae as a kai kōrero. You know, our interactions with the spiritual realm and the physical realm is evident within our kai kōrero, ceremonial kōrero around tangihanga. It's within our karakia and our waiata, including the karakia I just said, spoke to our atua or our deities, which exclusively is the makeup of the world that we see. Personally, from that perspective, I've never accepted that the system of a closed world, and that the spiritual realms interact with the physical world and vice versa. And these three tiers of the spiritual world talk about our atua. The second tier talks about us in the living, and the third tier our tupuna, who are now under the care of Whenua Tipo. So those have passed on. Our wāhi tapu are the landscape stories of our very identity, and they capture the mana of every tupuna who fought for our whenua. The mana still exists within our urupa. And most of our SESM sites today, we're experiencing breaches of tapu. Hauranga Pā is a clear example where we've had public access. It's created damage and also physical damage. The non-physical damage has been to us, the uri, and including the whānau that still live there at Hauranga Pā. We're here today, so mihi ana kia koe Mike, to your whānau as well, for all of the suffering that we've experienced down at Hauranga Pā. And the tapu actually recognises the spiritual quality of all the things associated with restriction and regulation, which necessarily relate to the spiritual dimension. Waia Marlene just spoke about our value of manaakitanga, and mana is that authority, but to aki someone or to uplift someone else's mana is that value. Performing karakia and giving safe passage for people to enter spaces is a critical value. And that is our responsibility as mana whenua, to uphold that safe passage as our tupuna did. Those who've passed on and they live through us, the living generation, and in turn we live through those that follow. I just wanted to share a whakatauki, a proverb. O tātou ngā kāmohi, me ngā waha kōrero o rātou mā ko ngaro ki te pō. So we are but the seeing eyes and speaking mouths of those who have passed on. It's essential to understand this concept and see the distinction between the three realms in Māori tradition. As you have read it here today, as you will see and as you will hear and experience the wairua. Firstly, in my karakia, the whakatauki, and if we've got time, I have a waiata for you. One of the comments I wanted to make about the last 2 days, it's been quite uncomfortable hearing some submitters speak outside their lane. I found that quite disturbing, that that surveyors are suggesting a cultural process. I think that's what I heard anyway. One other thing I heard was landowners and their uncertainty to do whatever they want with their land. Well, what about the uncertainty of mana whenua to protect their land? Very fine line. I do support the landscape significance myself personally. I think there's some room there to navigate. But of course, I've lost all my notes. Lastly, just wanted to talk about a value that Nāmahanga Kāore has. Mana Tiaki describes our role as guardians of the land for the benefit of future generations. which intimately entwine with our history, our culture, and our heritage by actively protecting and preserving the land. Our ahi ka continues to burn brightly. Likewise, it is our responsibility to ensure that people are culturally safe upon our lands. In doing so, we draw upon the deeds and the practices of our ancestors and source of inspiration and motivation for ngā mahanga a taere now and into the future. Just recently, a couple of years ago, I attended a wānanga hui at our marae, and our kaumātua there were there that day sharing stories with us that were crucial to these names that still exist in our landscape. Some of which of those names, some of the whānau that day had never heard before. But of course, it's important that these names are restored, including our wahitapu, which are, most of them hold our names. A question I have is around the well-being. My question is, where is the ambition to believe or agree with mana whenua when we're the ones trying to protect our land, trying to protect our wahitapu and our sacred sites? I've run out of notes. No, that's it.
All right, I think someone's going to put my name in as a submitter too.
Yes.
Over there. Keith
Manukau,
okay, thank you.
You're on the list here.
Okay. I was involved back in the 90s, along with Marlene, and then when the Resource Management Act came in, and the government gave the rules for the council to do these wahitapu sites. And at the time, they got one of the workers here, and what he did was got what was in the Archaeological Association's list, and that became the wahitapu list for Wellington District Council, which said that everything in the list is wahitapu. If it's not there, it's not wahitapu, so they didn't have to take note of. So we come in here with our sticks and stones, throwing them at the council, and it's sort of shock treatment to the council, but then we soon realised that we had to explain to them where we were coming from and why. It took a long time, but today they know. We're dealing with council staff and that know where we're coming from, why we're doing all of this, and why it's serious to us and important to us. So this is why it's been leaps and bounds to get to this plan change. It's not perfect, but it is where it is, and it's a long way ahead from where we were years ago. We got involved with the subdivisions, and then we come to the council, or not the councillors, but to the ones in charge of that department, that we wanted all the subdivisions within our tribal area, and so we could go over for these tapu places. And they agreed, and we were getting it, and we were shocked to know just how many were going through it too. But we kept up with it, and we took a view that it would be a win-win situation where we would have input in where they wanted to build or subdivide and all that sort of thing. And it did work out good. There were some stubborn ones, but oh well, it went and it was a success, and that happened for a few years until one of the applicants took it to the lawyer and said that we don't have to listen to that, or we have to listen to what's written exactly in the plan change, in the plans. So the council backed off at that time, and left us out of it. Now that happened for a while, and then the Waiitapu review come up. So when Dan was doing the sites, extents of the sites and all that, we gave him quite a few piles of the subdivision applications and the Waiitapu that we put on it. So that's how ours got put into the database. And we were quite happy with the extents that he did, because within the plan, the district plan, it was 100 metres, from that Waiitapu. So that gave us a site plus 100 metres around where we can negotiate with that applicant, either this or this or that. But we told Dan not to put everything in there because, well, we said we'll just put all the urupa in there because we didn't want people putting their houses there, digging up their, for septic tank overflow piles and all that sort of thing, which would disturb it. Changing a boundary line wouldn't do, there's not much of a issue to us. So that's how our list came about. And we're quite happy with it. With the submissions for and against, we go along with Dan's recommendation that they go back for further talk with us and that, and that's fine. It's just this one here, where the regional council, who want to take out 2 significant sites because they say that one's they don't know nothing about, and the other one's a paint mine, which is, they say, European origin. Well, we would like that as to be kept, those to be kept as significant sites to Māori, because back in the day, it was our people that knew about that kokowai or red ochre, which they made the paint from. What happened there was Europeans seeing our people going up there, and where it's got their Pirongia number 2, one of the sites, it's not the name of it, that name's wrong, but that was where they had their camp and their house there, so they would stay there and collect this kokowai. The Pākehā saw our people and want to know what they're doing, so they followed them. So that's how when our people went, then they went in there, they found out what it was, saw the opportunity they had, and chased our people away, wouldn't allow them back, took it over as a paint mine, used the tram line for taking the trees out to get the kokowai out as well, and made a commercial benefit out of it that went on for, it was the 19-something that they kept on getting it. Yeah. So I know that we're the regional council because we've had some dealings with them, and they're very slow off the mark, well behind the district council. And they want to, if they get these, not restrictions, but these citizens off these places within their, what they own, they don't have to be bound by the district council rules to deal with this. But it's not a Pākehā site. Originally, it was our site, and we would like that significance not written out of history. So that's just that one I'll present you today.
Julie, we're not hearing from the regional council, are we?
They haven't asked to be heard.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Keith, for highlighting that for us. I think we'll move through to some questions. One.
I've been asking questions of each of the hapu, and I think our submitters here have actually answered those 2 questions in terms of how you've been involved in the development of the list of sites and areas of significance, and you've done that, and also just talking through the extents and how you've come about that, and you've done that. I am interested in this particular site that you've mentioned just recently. I'm just trying to find a reference to that site. This is the kokowai site. And is the section, is Joe able to just help me identify where that site is?
It's the site actually at Hokiiti. It's 3 sites And in my appendix 6.
Yes.
They were submitted on by the Taranaki Regional Council.
I have quite a good map in my evidence, if that's helpful.
That's right. So in my appendix, they're on page 19, and their submission number is 549.3B, which can also be used for Dan's appendix 1.
Okay.
And the 3 site numbers are 200, 212, and 213, as they were submitted on.
Okay.
So Dan, your page number?
Okay.
My page number is page 106 for figure 61. That shows the location.
And what do you know about these sites, Dan?
I've been out to these sites and visited them as part of a damage assessment that I undertook back in 2019. So that mapping that you see there is actually the result of that damage assessment that I did.
Interesting. Perhaps I didn't have any particular question in regards to that. It just pricked my ears up when just giving us some of that background, which is when we read them in our documentation, paint mines, it sort of conjures up. I don't even know what that conjures up in my mind, but when you started talking about kokowai, I had a completely different understanding of what you're talking about. And kokowai is a very precious resource for our ancestors. And you know, when you talk about kokowai, then you're talking about probably shark liver oil that needs to be procured, and all of those things that need to be brought together, and then the use of it in painting, you know, precious things. We'll just leave it there. Yeah, it's quite important, and yeah, the whole context of it. So I was just grateful for you sharing that, because I probably otherwise wouldn't have been the wiser. Reading paint mines and thinking this is all a little bit strange. So I appreciated you just giving a bit more context and description to that. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Dan, your recommendations, there was a report provided that you say by the submitter, Taranaki Regional Council, that you said you hadn't managed to view it. Have you viewed that now?
No, I have not. So there's obviously the report that I wrote, but I understand that there's another report that they commissioned, which I believe was by Ivan Bruce. I haven't had the chance to chase that up, sorry.
And I'm just thinking that if the name's not correct, like Keith is, I wouldn't mind some more analysis of that issue and write a reply. We don't have any further evidence from Taranaki Regional Council. We have some evidence here from Keith, which is on the record now. So it'd be good to just work that through in terms of if the locations are right, but perhaps some naming. Joe, I'm not sure.
Dan's report, which fed into his précis of those 3 sites in this appendix, we can provide to you as well.
Okay.
And in fact, we want to provide it to Mahana as well.
Yes, yes.
That was done as a result of some work that the people at Pukeiti did in order to extend a track at the time. And there was some damage caused, and we sent Dan and one of the resource consent planners to assess the damage to the site, which was why that report was created at this time.
Okay, I'll be interested in that. I'm sure the other commissioners will too. So if we just get a circulation loop of that,
sure,
certainly to Keith and Tane as well. And I had a walk through Ehi in November with my wife and did a lot of the tracks. So yeah, it's quite a lot of work going on around that area. So thank you for that. David, did you have any questions? Or?
No questions for Keith or Tane. I've been carrying on my role as listening and recording, so I've taken screeds of notes. Thank you both. I just wanted a clarification on the last point that you discussed with Jo. I was just having trouble hearing, and she may have answered my question already, but was the report that was commissioned by the Regional Council attached to their submission?
No, it was not.
Okay, thank you. And just a subsequent to that, they're not attending today. They haven't submitted a statement at all, have they?
Not as far as I'm aware, no. Julie's saying no one being received. No.
Thank you. That's all from me, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have any other questions either. Thank you very much for your attendance. And just as Antoine said, just the stories about the Kokowai and its obvious values, but then the connections that can come to the fore in a hearing like this are pretty special. So thank you for giving us that information.
Just on that, there's a lot of those stories out there within the tribal area. But we keep it to ourselves because we were told to, because back in the day people used to go and dig and look for things and everything else. Those things are changing now. But a lot of the battlegrounds and all that we haven't included with our waitapu because we've gone and cleared those things because progress, people are going to develop here, there and everywhere. So it's better to have those lands cleared rather than protect them as tapu, to keep them as tapu. So that's the view we've been taking to over the years.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your assistance. Donna's been waiting patiently. We'll push Donna now. Yes. Can we see Donna and David? Well, not that we you're towering over us, David. So
when Donna speaks, she will.
When Donna speaks, she'll come on.
She'll do.
Yeah. Welcome, Donna.
Kia ora. Is it? Oh, kia ora koutou. Ko Donna Iriwata taku ingoa. No te hapu o Waitara, o Te Rawa, no Waitara ho. I stand here on behalf of my submission that we put in with Kotahitanga o Te Atiawa, talking about wahitapu and the processes and that we have been through as a hapu. I have also been involved in this since the RMA came in back in the 1980s, 1990s with the New Plymouth District Council. Been brought up in the realm under people like Ayla Taylor, and even if I say so, Grant Nucky has been an influence in the way that I've looked at processes, especially wahitapu and the protections of them. So what I stand here for is to ask for the utmost protection of our wahitapu. Our wahitapu are not just as the archaeologists see it, it's physical, it's more than that, it's spiritual, it's our whole being. And it's not just a place, it's our water, it's fluid. To me, to have to determine a wahitapu with a triangle or any kind of thing is goes against how we were brought up, but it has to play a part in the process, and that I believe it does need to be done like that. I congratulate the District Council for moving from a triangle to the perimeters. I still believe that it should be determined on how far from our waihi tapu protection should be determined by the activity of the resource consent or building consent. You know, you can't have a 50-metre determination on an oil rig. You might on a fence going up, but not on an oil rig, especially by our urupa and things like that, and our waterways and that. So that determination, I think, needs to play a part in it. Also, the complexity of our sites, at the way it's seen at the moment, they're very individualized, which is wrong. We, a lot of our sites, I can't remember offhand how many sites Otarawa has, but a lot of them have been found through accidental discovery. We have known where roughly they have been, but a lot of the actual papakainga, our mara, our mitten and that have been found because of accidental discovery. Just in case you mightn't know, Otarawa has the most oil and gas activity in our rohe than, I'd say nearly any other hapu iwi has. The amount of oil and gas wells that we have in our rohe nearly outnumbers the rest of New Zealand. We've got holes everywhere. We've got pipelines everywhere. We call it Spaghetti Junction. It's that, been populated that much with that kind of activity. And so a lot of our stuff has been found, our waihi tapu has been found because of that. We have a relationship that we've built up over decades where we have fought against these companies in ways that I don't know how our people didn't get hurt, but that's just the passion that we've had to protect our place. We are a hapu that we occupied for 5 months on a pā site, Tikorangi, because we were promised that they were going to go around it, and then they sold their rights from Swift Energy to Greymouth, and Greymouth wanted to put a pipe through our waihi tapu. So we protected it we had to actually physically live on the land to stop it. We had to stand in front of big trucks, our kuya and that, to stop this activity going ahead. He was calling out for the truck driver to drive over our kaumātua and our tamariki. The police had to stop them. They have no disrespect. They're over in other countries where they get away with this kind of thing. And they tried it in New Zealand. And we had the process that we were put through to have to protect the site again with district council has to be looked at. That it's too tedious. We stayed on there longer than we had to because we had to make sure that we were in the process of the district council, and to do that took months. We have sites, just say for Tikorangi again as an example, when they started digging there, they put down little flags to identify when they find a site. It was like Flag City. They were just, every time the digger moved, there was another site, there was another site. Each one of those get a number. But when you look at it on a schedule, you're looking at it as an individual. Something has to be done so you can look at it as a whole. Tikorangi is a massive physical entity, let alone what happened there and the wairua of our tupuna that is still there. There is no way of taking that into account when they do the waihi tapu project as they do it, which needs to be put in place where we can find a way of making our councils and that recognise what we feel and that about the place, not just what we see. That brings me to the parts about when people do actually put in applications. In Waitara, Otarawa has asked for decades, send us them, we see Waitara as a waihi tapu. Put a big circle around our rohe, there's our waihi tapu. So anything that happens in there, we want to be involved. And I believe our hapu is set up, our infrastructure that is set up, that we are able to do this. We are able to process and in 2 or 3 days, working days, come back with whether we have an issue or whatever in a building consent, and a resource consent, and a subdivision consent, and let's talk. We want to be involved. We have also pushed to be involved and do a spatial plan for our Waitara area. We have subdivisions coming on, 5 subdivisions just on one tributary, which they use as their stormwater pipe, is our kai basket. And we have to put up with them putting all their paru in from housing and from roading and that. 5 new subdivisions just from last year and this year that we're dealing with. And yeah, some other things. We have to make property developers more responsible for the waste and that comes off these subdivisions that everyone wants to build. And Waitara needs them. We need housing. But there's other ways of dealing with our waste instead of going in and ruining a beautiful tributary, a wahitapu, a kai basket of somewhere here in Aotearoa. There has to be another way. And we know those ways. We want to work with the developers. And I think that both of the commissioners were there when we've come across, when we did the Harab development. And that's allowed us to be more involved right from the beginning, right from design, right from the crossings, how they cross their sewage pipe across our kai baskets, where they go to, if there's going to be an accident, mitigate those kind of things. We can be involved. We have the resources and the personnel now, especially from the help with our iwi, from Kotahitanga, with people like Sarah Muckle being there with us and you know, just giving us that guarantee, you know, just being by us, being beside us to tell us that we're okay, we're on the right track. This is what our iwi does for us. They're our backbone, and I appreciate that. The working together of what they do with district council, so we can be involved in other projects also, because it protects our wahi tapu. And I can see the growth since I started, you know, 2-3 decades ago, the change in the district council. But the processes of getting there is so tedious and the wheels are too slow. And that's where I'd like to see the change also. And being involved in it. We want to be involved in the makeup of our town, of our rohi. Do not, our expertise in our kaumātua and our kuia, and especially in a person that we've got as our chairperson, Rawiri Dorba, he'd be one of the most knowledgeable people alive today in the surrounding areas of Wahitapu here in Taranaki, around here, of the history of what's happened around here. But he is not taken in the same regard as an archaeologist or an engineer or a planner, because he hasn't got that Pākehā tohu. That is wrong. That is wrong. We need them to be taken as equals. As I suppose the ideas that we said, I've done that in my submission, ID 635 with the wahitapu there. We do agree with the submitter there that it is in the wrong place. And the other one, 573, I think it's ID 573, is Tikorangi Pā. We totally disagree with Greymouth. They have done a report that, I'm sorry, I forgot the archaeologist's name. He did 2 reports. He did one for the first owners of Swift, where he identified these sites, put down what their sites were and the significance to our hapu. 5 years later, while we're doing the occupation, the next owner comes along, Greymouth, he does another report on the same wahitapu and denies that they are anything. So, you know, he's already said in one breath they are, and then he's gone along, and I don't know what reasoning it is. But we were able to put Tikorangi down as a site. The process of getting these sites recognised is something that also that needs to be looked at. It's just the tedious, you know, it's just too tedious. It needs to be, I don't know, looked at. Yeah, that's my statement. I won't, you've got most of what I've said in front of you. I'm very passionate about especially about Waitara. And means a lot to me personally to be a part of it. And I, you know, we have mana whenua here in Waitara and Tukurangi area, and we're proud of it. We're proud to be here. And yeah, so thank you very much for having me here in front of you.
Thank you. Kia ora, Donna, that's very, very helpful to us. And just a couple of comments before I go to questions. Certainly, commissioners like the three that are here, we're much more attuned these days to wahi tapu, cultural values. That's an expertise that stands on the same level of other areas of expertise when we're making decisions. So in hearing that, obviously I'm at, it's always made very clear that expertise around knowledge of wahi tapu, knowledge of history, that's very, very important evidence. So just wanted to make that comment. And the other thing is, I really like the way, well, David in particular has been talking about wahi tapu as a resource. And it's a resource, we've got the Resource Management Act, and it's one of the national importance matters that all planners and decision makers have to deal with. So think about it as a resource, that really changes, I think, just the way that people probably think about these places. Yeah, so that's just some feedback from me, but I'll move to Antoine in terms of questions and then to David. Thank you.
Ai tēnā koe, Donna. Ai, e mihi kauana ki te kaha o tō kōrero. Te ihi, te wehi me te wana. You just like to acknowledge the real passion that you is really obvious. This is an area you're really passionate about and it's really important. And so I just want to acknowledge that. You mentioned earlier that you'd been involved since the 80s and 90s in this area of work. And I just wondered if you just give us a little bit more explanation of your involvement with New Plymouth District Council in the last few years, just going through this process of identifying sites and areas of significance to Māori. I had a little look at the presentation we got the other day, and I think it was at least 157 sites for Otarawa hapu, but there's very likely to be many more as well. But I just wanted for what's been your involvement and how have you found that process?
Long and drawn out. Like anything really that in the last, or not the last couple of years, but many of the years before doing anything with the district council, it has been quite long and drawn out. But there's so many kaupapa that we're working with the district council that the wahi tapu at the moment has been put on the back burners. We don't really, unless it comes up on a resource consent, which it usually does because of Waitara and the significance in the history of Aotearoa that Waitara has through the land wars. You can't move around here without hitting a wahi tapu. I think by being by the side of many of wanting to educate now people, this is what's different, is that we're more open to wanting to educate people on what our wahi tapu are. Is the speaker before me said that a lot of years before, a lot of our tupuna didn't want to say about the significance of sites because they were too scared that they were going to be taken. And then ends up they are getting taken. So we have to come forward these days. That's the difference. We have to show people what they are, what they mean to us, and that's through education. District Council is more open to that. Their officers are more open to that. We have processes in place now that it is a norm now to when we look at, we're doing more than just resources, resource consents, building consents, subdivisions. We're doing projects with them. We're doing riparian planting. We're doing, looking at our reserves and doing joint management with them and taking into account our narratives, you know, our cultural narratives. We've been able to do that in our places. And so the history of our tupuna of our people on the land can now be told. So that's the stuff that we've been doing lately with the district council. Yeah, I think a lot of the fighting that was done before, you know, where Grant and them have done all of this, the hard work for us. And I was a young girl and watching all this and watching them do that. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we are now. It's like, you know, the reo. You know, if it wasn't for Kohanga Reo and the fighters that were back there for the reo, we wouldn't be where we are today. It's the same with these guys, Uncle Ayla Taylor and them. That's where, you know, all our kuia that Auntie Mariah Tippins, those people that were there fighting, we are reaping the benefits of that now, even though it might be small. When a lot of the young ones that have just come in and they're wanting more, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, 3 years, this is in the last 3 years, it's like bloody Christmas. Also, it's like Christmas. So yeah, but I'm glad with the young ones. They've got the heart for it. They've got the energy to keep going. And I think that with our iwi, especially people like Sarah Muckle and them, that we're going to go places and we'll be able to do it as a true partnership with the district council. They just have to get their processes working a bit faster.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just my last question, you mentioned a few sites and I just wanted to be clear about which sites you were mentioning, and maybe Joe might be able to help us out as well. You mentioned, I think, site 573. I don't like using numbers. It would be nice to know what site we were talking about by name. And
okay, the first one was meant to be, I think, a Papakainga. And okay. It was, sorry, the ID was 635 on that one, I think it was. I know where they were talking about where it was, but to us, it's across the road more, it's over more.
Okay.
Just pausing so we capture that. So Joe's.
Yes, Joe. I think it was Mrs. Jury that put in that.
It was Mrs. Jury who submitted on site 635.
Yes.
On Oturoa Road. So we've recommended that be removed from the district plan because there doesn't seem to be any evidence for it.
Okay.
If Oturoa didn't have any. And then site 573, we actually submitted on that as well. So we needed to amend the location of that site. It's not quite correct in the district plan.
Oh, I thought 573 was the Tikorangi Pa. No?
That's not the Abbey Jury one. We, it is partly that one.
So Commissioner Dash,
yes.
On page 5 of Donna's evidence.
Yes.
Out the assessor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you got that there.
Okay.
Antoine?
Yep. Hey, thank you. That's all my questions. Donna.
David?
Yes, thank you, Donna. Again, I've been recording lots of notes for my benefit and the panel. Certainly, when Anton spoke of the passion of your submission, that came through loud and clear. What I've recorded is that sites are sacred. That they're both physical and spiritual, and absolute protection is required. I think that was the key message I got from you.
Thank you.
The other point I just wanted to ask you about was, you said the process has been long and drawn out, and I think everyone in this room would probably acknowledge that, but I wonder whether you might agree that it's been like that for necessity, that it's important to get it right. The stakes are high for everyone, and I guess whatever gets put into the plan needs to be accurate and reflect everyone's aspirations. Would you agree with that?
To a point, I think that if the right resources had been put in place in the beginning, if hapu were resourced properly and we were able to participate properly in the process, something could have been done better. But what's happened though is that where these sites haven't been placed properly or are not even on there because they haven't been accepted by the district council, we're losing them. So we were losing sites nearly every week because they weren't on their schedule.
Yes.
So it's taken, it's over 10 years.
Yes. Yes.
And you just imagine, you lose a site a week, what we're losing. And we've had to put up with this. And the only way we can stop some stuff like this is by doing these protests and doing these occupations.
Yes. Have you given any consideration to what Ngāti Raurewe did in terms of promulgating a plan change with the council back in 2016 or 2017? I think where they added some 64 sites. Have your hapu given any consideration to that sort of initiative?
We've tried to work within the realms of the process of district council, and two, it's just the utilisation, resource to be able to do that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, we've done it with the regional council. I mean, they had a young girl come along. I think she was in between universities. And she did the sites in 12 weeks.
Okay.
So
it's about resources.
I think a lot of it's to do with resourcing.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so what we have in front of us is probably best described as a snapshot of the best information available at the time, or the information that's being put forward at least, but the process is ongoing, isn't it?
It is. That's why I've always requested that, is, send us through the resource consents, the building consents, the subdivision, sorry, not consents, the applications, and let us determine whether we have an issue with what's happening, or can we support it. Okay. And we're set up to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good. Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, and thank you, Donna. I don't have any other questions. Appreciate your attendance, and thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Aki te.
Good day. So, Jackie and Richard.
Commissioner, we have a time constraint with Commissioner McMahon. He has to leave the house at 6 o'clock. And we've got 2 more submitters to go.
Yeah, so we've got,
so you're aware of that.
PKW and then Yes, okay. Well, we'll do our best. So we'll come forward.
Nā tātou, ko David ki te tātou, ki te ako te maua o Taraki, tēnā tātou te i o kani o Ngā Mitu, kia ora tātou. Kia ora, ko Richard Paramai, e mahi ane au e Paranei ki Waitutara, te rau whakamopito. Just a couple of things quickly before Jake gets into it. About me, I should probably also state that I have been involved in the submission and further submission for Namanga Tairi, and also for Papere Rangi Pokitapu, the import at both stages as well. No longer there for mahi, but now pick it up, but just here for the state.
Great, thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Jackie Pini ko Taranaki iwi te katoa. So nice to be here today, and on behalf of Parananahi ki Waitotara, my role there is Te Rauwhakapulawai. So my position is to take care of the team, to ensure they're adequately resourced to do what they do, but fundamentally to achieve the objectives of our whānau, who are our shareholders.
We do get, we do the presentation. I'll quickly go through it. We had our submission and we did put a bit of our history in there. We can kind of quickly go over some of that, just to get a bit of understanding of who we are in our construct, being essentially a makeup of all 80 of Taranaki.
So what we wanted to do today was, I guess, take the words off the page and give a little bit of imagery to some of the cordial. So our role here is to tautoko essentially the position of mana whenua. While we are, part of that as individuals and as a representative or kaitiaki of the whenua that remains in some regard, fundamentally our people on the ground are the ones who give us guidance on how we go about doing what we do as an organisation. So I'll give a bit of history. Richard will help. So where do we start, Richard? It is an intense history. I mean, I think we can't get away from that. And we can't forget too that it started at Kohiapa with the first shots being fired and the war that broke out. So the significance for the New Plymouth District Council and their processes is even more relevant than any other council in Taranaki, let alone the country. Yeah. So I just want to make sure we ground ourselves in that. That conflict arose out of that press of the time for settlers to have whenua, right? And it resulted in a period of significant conflict and war. And it was devastating for our people. And still we feel that today through a range of different things. I'm sure I don't have to highlight those. But fundamentally, it resulted in the confiscation of almost all of our whenua. So Governor Gray, I believe at the time, drew that awful zigzag that represents the taking, the unjustified taking, as it has subsequently been determined, of our whenua. So everything to the left of that zigzag, and I have nightmares about that zigzag at times, as I'm sure our tupuna did too. So that basically covered 500,000 hectares. 500,000 hectares. It was almost one of the most devastating confiscations in Aotearoa. And essentially everything was taken from us. And if we were either on that whenua or fighting to reclaim some part of it, we were considered rebels and at war with the Crown. So that just gives you a little bit of context, but particularly for that area of the New Plymouth District Council, it's particularly rich and particularly relevant. So that led to a period of, I guess, petition from our people through a range of different methods, but we essentially started off through war, which then turned to fighting through the pen. And those submissions to Cabinet at the time led to us seeking some correction to the injustices of the day. That eventually got heard, and it became quite clear that the confiscation was actually unjust. It shouldn't have happened. So while that injustice was acknowledged, the pressures of the time, the settling of Aotearoa, but particularly in our rohe, was driving, I guess, the alienation of our whenua like never before, really. So by the time we finally got some acknowledgement, some 20 odd years later, in 1881, the West Coast Summit Reserves Act was founded, or a precursor of it, some version thereof, with what remained, essentially what hadn't been sold. Bearing in mind it was 500,000 hectares, just over. And by within 20, nearly 30 years, there was only 80,000 hectares left that were technically still in control of the Crown. So that just gives you some context for that. And what they decided to do was not give it back to the rightful owners, or even though we don't use that word, the rightful mana whenua. What they decided to do was put it into perpetual leases that we actually even weren't allowed to lease at that time. The legislation was explicit that we couldn't even lease it. So there was a range of issues that arose from the creation of the leases, because if you were still considered a rebel of the day, you didn't get to go on the list of owners. So that if you weren't here in the location, and to be honest, we had almost nowhere to go, so you were generally somewhere else, you didn't get to go on the list. What that resulted in is, a lot of whānau opted for a different name to get on that list. And a lot of our whānau had to prove that they weren't in rebellion. That's how they got on the list. So all of that paints a picture of a situation where we are now in, where our owners have angst amongst each other, because some of their whānau missed out on being a shareholder in what is now the incorporation today. But moving through, what that did do is at least give them a link to their particular piece of whenua, so they could put their name down, attach it to the whenua at the time, and clearly declare that that was their whakapapa link to that whenua. So throughout the next, I guess, what is it, nearly 50 years, there was a whole process whereby the Crown decided to lease out those leases, not to Māori because they were explicitly excluded. But on top of that, what the perpetual leases were supposed to do was protect the whenua. But the Crown found that it was extremely onerous to administer. So over time, the easier option was to sell it. And the majority of it got sold. So by 1963, with the pressure of having to administer for what was roughly 5,000 Māori, I believe, initially, they decided to amalgamate the lands, plural. We could turn the slide just for a moment. They decided to amalgamate the lands. There was a lot more than the blue at that time. This is in 1964, and essentially create a shareholding structure. So we all became owners in the entirety of the incorporation, rather than directly linked to the whenua that we had whakapapa to. Does that make it clear? So if we turn back to the prior slide, thanks, Julie. So obviously that created the mega reserves, and it created a further alienation of our whānau from their whenua, which is fundamentally how they connect. So that continued, obviously. The native trustee, I believe at the time, was administering the incorporation lands, and they continued to sell. And there was through a range of means, and the submission details were correct. And of course, all our owners were technically classed as shareholders, so it just removed again connection. Unfortunately, the Crown continued to sell the whenua. What they shouldn't have really been selling, but there were mechanisms within the legislation which enabled it to occur. And there was a movement, right? There was a movement of our own who never gave up the fight to say, actually, this is wrong. And I'm sure we're all aware of the huge movement that was led by a number of our our kaumātua, but particularly one I'll name, which is Dame Whina Hooper, the Not One Acre More march, the land marches of the mid-1970s. And it was those calls that really forced our whānau to call themselves together to say, what can we do to stop this? There'll be nothing left. So if we can turn the page. And our whānau came together, our whānau who were actually farmers, often through their Pākehā connection, who had an understanding on how to make an economic opportunity out of what was now farmland. They called together a group of our owners, or as many owners as they could find. So they put out the petition to our loan to say, let's come together, let's wrestle control from the Crown, let's build up the economic wealth of what remains and ensure, it remains for the future. So that was successful. And essentially that's how Parananahiki Waitotara Corporation was established. And just in terms of that name, Parananahi, obviously, is our White Cliffs in the north, to Waitotara in the south. So we represent the whenua that's in between, but of course what's a lot of it is no longer in our control. So if we could just turn that page. Anything you wanted to add there, Richard? Thank you, so whenua, our whenua is our enabler. I don't know how else to sum it up really. But it also comes with constraints. So the biggest constraint was that it was a perpetual lease. It was changed from terminating leases. So irrespective of being an owner of that land, we were supposed to derive some sort of economic benefit from. It was also at peppercorn rates or rentals. I think it was $1.
It was based on an unimproved land value, so it was from the fact that it acknowledged the set of farmers who acquired the whenua and cleared and developed it. It took a notion of that, so what was left was deemed the unproductive part that wasn't developed, and therefore the rentals derived off that mechanism. So hence why it's peppercorn, given the nature of the region. But I guess on our left here in 76 we were formed. The blue is the Corpus whenua that came across. And up in the corner we have the Māori Reserve with Land Amendments Act. So that was the movement and started in the late 80s, finally came to fruition in the mid 90s. And some of you may remember the Tractor March to Parliament in 96. This was the results of that amended act. So what it allowed us to do was take those 21-year perpetual renewal terms, which subsequently led into a rent review from 21 down to 7. The leases remain perpetual, so we cannot break them. But what we did, what was achieved was a mechanism to market. And also a first right of refusal. So that perpetual first right of refusal was any time a leasehold wished to sell the interest, we get a right to match. While that's great in principle, it is a difficult challenge. One, it's the capital constraint of doing that, but two, we have to buy it at market, which incorporates the lease's interest, which also incorporates the lease's interest in the leasehold. So that drives the value. So not only are we buying, we're actually buying it at overs, over 50% higher than what a market value would be without that. So that's probably the hardest thing to stomach, is that we can buy a whenua back, but there's a cost of doing that to what we perceive to our disadvantage. So, sorry.
But I think the point that Richard's just raised really rightly is that while this provided an opportunity for us to finally make some economic gain, because we've got rid of the peppercorn rents and had achieved the market rental opportunity, we still have to buy it all back. So that rental stream, which is already low or not able to be reviewed very regularly, so once every 7 years, is what we've got to buy our own land back. And then we have to buy the lease's improvements with that. So whatever they've done to the whenua, we've got to pay them for that.
Yeah, so what we moved to on the right is those parts that we are actively control. So what that 96 amendment did allow us is to actually start that purchase on that whenua, which we are now enacting. Certain parcels that make that economic sense for us initially to acquire.
So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things before we move on, and it's more about what I've already heard today is that our connection is never severed, and that connection has continued. And while that connection is really important that everyone understands that in terms of the sites of significance, we are also dealing with the continued confiscation issues today. So it's very real for us as Parananahiki Waitotara. We have to make hard decisions about whenua that finally comes up as an opportunity for us to buy. And as we know, a lot of our farmers are intergenerational, so they're there for they've been there for a long time. So we might not get that opportunity. But if our organisation isn't strong and ready to respond, or can't because it's going to take too much investment to repair the whenua, to make it economic, then we have to pass it by. And that 20-day window is so wrong. I just can't say it any other way. It's so wrong because we get no opportunity to negotiate that price at market. We have to pick up that piece of whenua on the basis of which it's been negotiated in the marketplace, which, as we know, gets a bit inflated, especially if they think we might be interested in that parcel. So there's all those challenges we have to live with every day. So I just wanted to highlight that particular point.
Thank you, Jackie.
If we can move through to the next slide, Shirley. Irrespective of all of that, as Richard highlighted, all those bits in yellow, those beautiful bits of yellow, is what we've been able to bring back into our control. And that's through, basically doing a lot of hard yards of building up the value, getting the better income streams. So continuing those fights around that, but also making sure we do good business as a as a Māori leader in the space of whenua ownership in that Pākehā context. So what we've been able to do is purchase back roughly around, what is it? Yeah, about 3,500 hectares that we actively manage, the majority of which is in farms. So we believe that we have a responsibility to take care of that whenua in a way that is different to what previous farming may have looked like. And we do it off the back of our people's expectations. So for us, they have set us on a path of being really clear how we will farm our whenua, how we will take care of our people while we're doing that, to ultimately sustain and grow ourselves. So that's I guess that's the driving force of us, is our people on the ground ensuring that we do business in the way that they can be proud of. So they do that through these key mission statements and visions, as well as alongside the core values. And these are Māori ones, but they've been interpreted to be of relevance to us here in Taranaki. And our long-term objectives, I think they will resonate with some of the kōrero you've already heard on the ground today from our teams on the ground. But at the end of it, we're all continuing that legacy of determination and resilience, which is what our tūpuna have laid down for us and what we continue to work towards ourselves. Because you've got to be resilient in this space, particularly here in Taranaki. And particularly here in the New Plymouth district as well. Just the history alone, the resilience that it's taken to survive, the resilience that it's going to take for us to continue to survive without being removed from our own landscape. So that strength, it lies in our whenua, of course, but it's also in our connection to each other. So making sure we do that well with each other is critical. We're an intergenerational business. We have taken control of our own destiny. That is what we are the most proud of. And we're making sure that we achieve all these key objectives. And again, there are many objectives of most Māori organisations. And they're complex and they're challenging, being meaningful to our own, employing our own, providing economic benefit and opportunity is critical. It's what changes that social dial for our people. Exercising kaitiakitanga is crucial to what we do. If we do farming in a way that is harmful to our whenua, then our people will soon let us know that we won't be doing it for much longer. We have to protect and grow our assets for the future. We've done that quite well. We are now a $300 million entity from a value perspective. And we have a lot of kaimahi a lot of contract milkers, share milkers, and business partners who rely on us for their livelihoods. And a lot of those are a good percentage are Māori. We are innovative and a positive force in the Taranaki Māori economy. We are Taranaki's largest dairy farmer. We are Fonterra's largest Māori farmer, shareholder. So we are also the largest landowner across Taranaki, even though for an awful chunk of it, we don't get a lot of say until these times, till hearing times or council times. And we don't, you know, it's our nature not to remind everyone of that. We wanted to just state that today. And that it's important to our whānau because they see the opportunity it presents. And we are committed to delivering sustainable returns. We've learnt some hard lessons along our growth journey, and with all those pressures that the needs of our people create, they can make some you know, quick decisions. But we have learnt to do that better over time. And we're focused on being successful. We have to be. Our people expect it of us. So that's really important what we are. We turn the page once again. I wanted to bring us back to kaitiakitanga because there's been some comments, particularly from federated farmers who I know are on the line, so I wanted to raise it, which concern me. Our role as one of the largest dairy farmers, well, the largest dairy farmer in Taranaki, is to be good kaitiaki, first and foremost. That is our responsibility. And sites of significance to Māori isn't something that should get in the way. It is something that enriches and enhances what we do every day. We are a food basket as Taranaki, and I get that, but we have obligations in how we do it. We've got to make sure we do it well. And our kaitiakitanga strategy was formed with a workshop of our kui and our kaumātua and our key stakeholders. This is how they told us to do it. We have to take care of our waimaori. We have to take care of our how we farm. Our farming methods have to be good. We have to do it from a leadership and advocacy perspective. So lead from the front around environmental sustainability. Don't allow it to be done to you, but lead from the front and build up the biodiversity back on the whenua that hasn't been there for a very long time. Make sure we allow opportunities of reconnection, and I wanted to talk more about this. Our people have been disconnected from an awful lot of that whenua for over 170 years. And what our opportunity provides is time to reconnect. Over the last 2 years, we have focused primarily on bringing our whānau back onto the whenua and reclaiming these special places, these sites of significance, and asking them, would they like to gift us with some names for, you know, at the moment we're farm 1 to farm 20, and that's not who we are, but we're not the ones who should be giving the names. It's the hapu and the mana whenua on the ground. And so we've gone through a really meaningful process of doing that. But part of that is ensuring that they are able to connect to a wahi tapu that they've looked over the fence at for 170 years. So reconnection is imperative. And the last one is about climate change. We're all struggling with that take, and we should, because it's a big one. But that is top of mind for us. How do we ensure we don't contribute to the degradation of our climate? So that is a key focus. Anything else you want to raise? So for us, it is about supporting mana whenua and their submissions today. It is not only highlighting the historical context in which we all stem from, and that is the raupatu that has occurred across Taranaki, but started here in the New Plymouth District Council, particularly at Te Kuhia Pa. But also wanting to highlight that our sites of significance are our landscape. They are who we are. We are connected to them and they're interconnected. And if we don't have the opportunity to protect them as we see fit, based off what is essentially only a Pākehā assessment of their relevance or their evidence, then I think we're disrespectful to the entirety of the history that's gone before. So I would only encourage us to do that, and allow us the time to be the experts in this space, and also in terms of the process, resource it. I've heard that time and time again. If our whānau had the time and were considered experts, then the conversation and the evidence would be so much richer. So, order. Yeah, no, you go.
Good. I guess for me, it's just that farming with this aspect. We have of the whenua we control, it's about 63 sites of significance. This is for Taranaki White. So most of the farms are actually in the South Taranaki District Council, not up here in the north or in New Plymouth, but not yet. But we do have whenua up here that we farm. But most of our sites are there, so it's about that identification and protection of those sites and the farming activities within those sites. So most of our sites, depending on hapu, can be grazed with white cattle or cattle. It's about that audit, how we protect them, how we ensure that they're and not degraded for that farming. Those farming.
Thank you, Richard. Should we move to some questions? Starting with you, Antoine. And yes, so just I'm mindful that David has to go at 6, and I just don't think we're going to Mr. Skipper. So maybe let's have some brief questions, and then we can.
Yeah. I've only just got 2 brief questions. Well, firstly, just to acknowledge the presentation. We've popped up to the offices before, but we haven't had, and I did grab one of the annual reports to sort of have a nosy, but it was nice having the presentation and just going through the history for us. So that was very valuable, and we did go to one of the sites. Chingas, I'm trying to remember one of the sites. It was a farm property, and it was surrounded by residential subdivision.
Glenn may speak on later.
And it was really a privilege to be able to go up to the site and see all of the issues of urban encroachment, and then there was this wonderful piece of land which was being farmed and obviously cared for. So it was nice to hear the context for that. I've just got 2 specific questions, and they're not necessarily directly related to heritage, but they're just helpful. One is just about your RFR, the rights of first refusal. Do they apply in perpetuity, or are they time constrained, or they are one-off when the property comes up for the sale? It's a once only.
So the opportunity arises once a sale and purchase agreement has been negotiated and executed. So from that, we get 20 working days to therefore accept or decline, and they do come up every time that property sells also.
Okay.
But you see there is some intergenerational.
That's great.
Outs there.
So there's some intergenerational rights that the current owners have, the lessees. So they have one intergenerational right, which allows them not to put it up as a first right for us to pick up, should we choose to. Okay. But I guess the question you're asking is, does it last forevermore? And it does, technically.
Okay, well, that's interesting. The other question was, are you precluded from purchasing other property? So, for instance, you can buy property on the market. You can go and strategically.
We have a mixture of corpus whenua, Māori freehold, and general title. So we do have both. Predominantly, it's our corpus whenua, which makes up most of that 20,000 hectares, but we do have the other aspects as well.
But there's also a bit of a clink in the legislation as well, because what can happen is that a first right of refusal may come up, but if it happens to have been integrated, the freehold block next to it, then what happens, of course, is that it only has to go up as an entire block, both a leasehold and a freehold. Okay. So for us, that means that we are really constrained, or are having to purchase both the freehold and the leasehold.
Yeah, the first right extends across the whole sale purchase agreement.
It extends across the whole, which is good, should we wish to uplift it, but it also makes it extraordinarily difficult when you have to, instead of paying potentially 5 million for the leasehold block, you have to pay 15 million for the freehold plus leasehold.
Wow.
So that just gives you some insight. Oh, and on top of that, what's historically happened is that over time, the farm owner or the farming whānau has bought up its surrounding blocks. So they've amalgamated and contiguised, I don't know if that's a word, the surrounding blocks to build a farming empire for their whānau. So when it comes to us, it can be so out of reach just from a financial purchase perspective. But on top of that, if it happens to come to us, what we find is that the perpetual lease block has been quite run down.
Yes.
The focus goes into what they actually own in its entirety, the freehold block.
Yeah.
So often the infrastructure needs rebuilding. The farm shed is in dire straits. So on top of the purchase of some of the most expensive land in the world, you then also have to rebuild the infrastructure. So those are the challenges that we have economically.
Okay, thank you very much for that. David?
Yes, no, thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Jackie and Richard. That's a very valuable context to, I guess, the big picture context and the corporate type context to the specific hapu evidence that we've heard over the last 2 days. So I'm very pleased to hear that. And thank you, Richard, for refreshing my memory on the right of first refusal process. I've had some involvement with that with Te Runanga Ono Tahu in Christchurch. So it's been a few years though since I've had to exercise my mind on it. So it felt like a nice refresher from you. So ka pai for that. No specific questions from me, Stephen.
Yes, I just had one question about the rules associated with fencing and tracking and those sort of things, which Federated Farmers are seeking some changes on. You mentioned, were they the matters that you were concerned about in terms of?
The fact that there are no regulations or no of an open slather is the biggest concern.
Yes. I suppose they were looking at some further clarification on some of the rules, because there are rules in there about leaving the key one existing tracks. I was just looking at some, Joe, how would you describe this? Some further tweaks or some further, yes.
Yeah, I guess trying to take us into consideration, go back to Marlene's question around those tracks and those implications and how that may seem minor, but it can still have that physical interference, but also that's spiritual non-physical as well.
So we've got some good evidence on that. Certainly the Marlene's photos do bring a different perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, but a lot of it's access too. I'm just highlight. You know, if you don't have some of those rules, what would it look like? And that's the worry for me.
Yes.
But it comes down to, are we as an industry prepared to commit to partnering with Māori to enrich the way we practice or not? And I think that's the not should be.
All right. Well, thank you for your attendance. Certainly some of the entities around Taranaki we're learning a lot about. I was interested to see how Taranaki to Ki Waitotara sort of fit into the mix, and the history of where all that land has come perhaps to you as a business. It's just fascinating. So thank you for that, and good luck with your sustainable business. So we have Mr. Skipper, who's been patiently waiting today. So yes, Glenn, welcome.
I'm not sure if somebody has to leave. I think I have some quite different views on some of these things, which are going to lead to a lot of questions.
That's what I was a bit concerned about. We are going to reconvene, Glenn, because we've got a number of parties that we just haven't run out of time to hear. I think you've been online pretty much through the last couple of days, is that?
Since yesterday afternoon, yeah, since the 1 o'clock session, yep.
Hence, I really appreciate you listening in, because there's been quite a lot of discussions that you would have heard, and we've your view.
Sorry,
Yeah, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. So you listening to that, Korero, I think is quite important. So we do want to get your views, certainly in terms of your hapu as well. So would you be comfortable just coming back on a rescheduled day? We need to discuss that now before David goes, so everyone can contribute to the possible reconvening of another day.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, so apologies we haven't got to you, but thank you for your attendance.
That's all right.
So Julie, do you want to, we signalled yesterday that we just weren't going to make the time, the 2.5 days we had scheduled. Julie has been looking at other dates that might work, and I think we're settling on the 3rd and 4th of March, which are Wednesday and Thursday.
Wednesday and Friday.
Sorry, a Thursday and a Friday. And there's some administration work that Julie will need to do just to confirm all that. But both Commissioner McMahon and I are available on those days. Commissioner Coffin does have some timing constraints, so I think we would have to schedule some time over both of those days. But in general terms, for those dates, will be workable. Sarah?
Yep, for me that's.
Okay. Glenn, how about you?
Yep, I'm free on those days.
Great. Well, I think just can we just lock those into your diaries? There's going to be some more details coming in from Julie just about specific time frames and how we're going to manage it, whether we do it face to face. I presume, is there probably a preference to do at least have me here, or can we do it by Zoom?
I think Zoom would be, I'd be comfortable with Zoom.
So the submitters that we are with Ngāti Rahiri, Ngāti Tāwhirikura, Ngāti Tuwiti and Ngāti Tuparakino, and then the legal submissions and planning submissions for Te Pahitanga, and then the 42 right of reply.
Yes.
I think just looking at what case numbers did today, and there's been quite a jump in Taranaki cases as well. Another 2 weeks will be in quite a different situation.
So we should be planning for a Zoom, I think. Yes. All right. That's great. And yes. Well, let's finish there. We'll adjourn the hearing until further notice. In terms of, but those days are penciled written. I would very much like to thank everyone for their participation again. It's been a very interesting day, and having both legal expertise, expert planning evidence, but evidence from hapu as experts in your areas. Those 3 elements are hugely important to making good decisions for us. So the time and effort for you to come and share that those values, your expertise in those areas is incredibly valuable to us. So I'd just like to acknowledge you, and for just sharing that information, because we are here to make good decisions with the information we have. So on that note, I wonder, Anaru, could you please close today for us?
Ka tika i runga tēnei tēnei kia koutou. Tūtahira, nei ratu i kia koutou, ko nā kaikohi mana. Nā koutou i whakatūpera mai tēnei whāriki. Hei kōrero, hei whakawhiti kōrero, hei whakawhiti whakaro hokui. Tēnā koutou, tērā, kai kōrero, kai whakarite i tēnei aiahi, tēnei rā. nā koutou I whakahoho tō mātou, tō tātou mohiotanga, pāra ki tēnei kaupapa, ara nā wahi tapu, nā kōrero, tūturu, I mi kawana kia koutou, pōtera kia tātou. Nō reira, tūturu o ti waka maua kia tēnā, uie, kia tātou.
Dora, thank you. We've been 6 o'clock buzzer this time.
By 3 minutes.